Chapter 1135. Just as Luo Fan was shocked by the power of the space-time modifier, the planetary fortress suddenly rang with an incomparably sharp siren. The sound of the siren spread to every corner of the planetary fortress, every inch of space. Under such a siren, the planetary fortress instantly became noisy. Almost all the living beings living on the planetary fortress were screaming, because the residents of the planetary fortress were already very clear about such a siren. This meant that the entire planetary fortress was about to be abandoned, and all the residents were about to be completely destroyed. For the nation of eternity, which had hundreds of millions of galaxies, the number of people had almost reached a terrifying level that could not be described with numbers. Although there were hundreds of millions of people living on the planetary fortress, compared to the entire nation of eternity, it was not even comparable to a single hair from 9 oxen. When the nation of eternity encountered a certain degree of danger, it was, of course, natural for the nation of eternity to completely abandon the entire planetary fortress along with its hundreds of millions of people. However, if such a natural thing were to happen to the hundreds of millions of people in the planetary fortress, it would be a disaster of despair and annihilation. Under such circumstances, when the residents of the planetary fortress heard such a sharp and terrifying siren, how could they not turn pale with fright and become hysterical? With a slight thought, Luo Fan's perception invaded the memory of a creature who was screaming hysterically, and he instantly discovered the meaning of this siren. For a moment, his expression changed slightly. The destruction of the planetary fortress did not pose much of a threat to him. Even if there were weapons of the level of the universe obliteration cannon here, they would not be able to break through the three-dimensional talisman constructed by the gray existence around him, let alone hurt him. Therefore, the damage caused by the destruction of the planetary fortress did not affect him much at all. What made his expression change slightly was the reason why the planetary fortress was about to be destroyed. Why was the planetary fortress about to be completely destroyed without any warning? This was what Luo Fan was concerned about. Did I miss something and let them discover my existence? Such a thought flashed in his mind. With a thought, his perception instantly enveloped the entire planetary fortress. He had investigated the planetary fortress previously. He had completely figured out the specific operating mechanism of the planetary fortress. At this moment, he instantly felt the changes that were happening inside the planetary fortress. At the center of the planetary fortress was the core of the planetary fortress. It was also the power core of the entire planetary fortress, which was equivalent to the power source of the planetary fortress. A shocking change was taking place. Endless energy seemed to be born out of thin air, frantically pouring into the power core of this planetary fortress. Under the infusion of this boundless energy, the power core that was originally material gradually became like a body of energy, gradually emitting an indescribable light. The light penetrated through the layers of barriers and seeped through the originally tight gaps of the planetary fortress. Finally, it broke through the surface of the planetary fortress. From the outside, the entire planetary fortress looked like a bomb that was about to explode from within. Due to the infusion of the energy, the amount was simply too great. In the end, it caused an astonishing change in time and space, completely separating the huge volume of space-time where the core of the planetary fortress was located from the outside world. Even the internal nomological laws were completely bunched up during this process, forming an extremely strange defense that blocked Luo Fan's perception. Blocking Luo Fan's perception, Luo Fan felt that he needed to increase his perception by more than 10 times in order to break through the defense and discover the changes inside the core. As more and more energy poured into it out of thin air, the light emitted by the power core also became more and more intense. And, as the changes occurred, the light that was emitted from the power core gradually became more and more intense. As the light changed, it also gradually gained that strange quality, bringing out the changes that were happening within the power core along with the light. As a result, the change in space-time and the area where the rules and laws were clumped together continued to expand. It was originally limited to the core of the planet where the power core was located, but it continued to expand outwards. In just a breath's time, it had already expanded to the entire planetary fortress. Next, the muzzles of the universe destroyer cannons on the planetary fortress changed from their original outward direction to the direction of the power core of the planetary fortress. Following this change, the surface of the planetary fortress was directly covered with a thick barrier that seemed to have been formed by some strange processing of time and space. This barrier was crystal clear. It looked like an ordinary crystal, but it naturally exuded an indescribable, unbreakable, and terrifying aura. This aura gave off the feeling that it wanted to be broken. One needed to have the power to destroy a universe and a space-time in order to do so. Needless to say, Luo Fan's perception was very fast. Although only a short period of time had passed since the siren sounded, it had only been less than a breath's time from the change in the power core below to the appearance of a huge, translucent, crystal-like barrier on the surface of the planetary fortress. However, in such a short period of time, Luo Fan had already investigated everything. At least, this was everything he needed to know. This is the power of the space-time modifier. It is indeed terrifyingly powerful. At this time, Luo Fan had already found the source of the changes that had happened to the planetary fortress. For a moment, he could not help but feel shocked and amazed. The layer of strange barrier that was sealing off the entire planetary fortress was indeed modified by time and space. Although the defensive ability of this barrier was far inferior to that of the three-dimensional talisman constructed by the grayish existence that he had attached to his body, it was still an extremely shocking defense. Such a defense could almost withstand the impact of the destruction of the world. Crystal Wall, this name is quite appropriate. Not only did he find the source of the changes that had caused the entire planetary fortress to change, but he also found the name of the layer of crystal outside the planetary fortress through the command platform that he was consulting. The reason why this name was appropriate was that before Luo Fan had transmigrated, he had heard of a legend on Earth that the barriers between countless multiverses were layers of crystal walls. The barrier that was formed by the modification of time and space before him clearly had some charm. It also had a certain charm to it. It was indeed quite appropriate to call a crystal wall. At this moment, the universe obliteration cannon that was aimed at the power core finally fired. An extremely fast light shot out of the universe obliteration cannon, penetrated the layers of metal barriers, and blasted into the power core of the planetary fortress. Boundless heat erupted from the light shot out of the universe obliteration cannon at the moment of the bombardment, and time and space were in complete chaos at this moment. The nomological laws that were originally clumped together to form a layer of strange defense collapsed completely in an instant, revealing the strange existence that was still a physical entity at the center of the power core. It was an existence that even the universe obliteration cannon could not shake. It was a whole entity that only had an hour hand, a minute hand, and a dial without any markings. Is this the space-time modifier? When Luo Fan saw this strange object, his eyes lit up, and he took a light step forward. In the blink of an eye, he had already penetrated the layers of barriers and arrived at the core of the universe obliteration cannon's bombardment, arriving in front of the object. Unfortunately, even though Luo Fan's speed was extremely fast, reaching an unimaginable and even surpassing the limits of time, when he appeared in front of the object trembled slightly before disappearing without a trace. There were no strange fluctuations or special changes during the entire process of its disappearance. It was as if the object had never existed, and what was left behind was just a shadow of nothingness. No, it wasn't even a shadow of nothingness. Even if it was a shadow of nothingness, when it disappeared in front of Luo Fan, there would definitely be special changes that he could detect. However, the object in front of him didn't change at all. This meant that this object couldn't even be considered a shadow, but an indescribable phenomenon. Seeing this, Luo Fan didn't hesitate. He lifted his hand and covered the place where the shadow had disappeared. In an instant, time reversed. The light and shadow reassembled. The surrounding time, space, and even the heat produced by the universe obliteration cannon and the light from the universe obliteration cannon started to reverse time with this change and reappeared in the blink of an eye. This was the appearance of the object when it still existed here. However, apart from that object, it didn't appear at all. That object didn't appear at all. It was as if that object didn't exist at that moment, as if it had never been here before. The space-time modifier is indeed powerful. It's just a bit of energy, and it's not affected by the reversal of time. Luo Fan sighed and finally gave up on the idea of continuing to search for the object. Although the object appeared for an extremely short period of time, to the point where Luo Fan couldn't even touch it with his own hands or with his senses, he knew immediately that it was just a bit of energy that had been modified by the space-time modifier and contained some of the space-time modifier's power. The crystal wall that appeared around the planetary fortress was the result of the modification of the space-time modifier's energy. And this energy had obviously been completely used up in such a transformation and then completely disappeared without a trace. What Luo Fan saw and sensed was a trace left behind by the energy in time before it disappeared. In essence, it was similar to a mark. It was just more illusory, harder to perceive, and harder to grasp. It was similar to a mark of an abstract phenomenon. The traces imprinted on time itself were integrated with time itself. Under such circumstances, it was impossible for Luo Fan to reverse time and find the imprint. It was even more impossible for him to go back to the time when the energy still existed to see what it looked like. This space-time modifier is really making me more and more interested. A faint smile appeared on Luo Fan's face as this thought flashed across his mind. The surrounding universe obliteration cannons seemed to be facing an enemy that wouldn't rest until one of them was dead. They fired one shot after another in a frenzy. The indescribable heat had already turned the entire planetary fortress into nothingness. It had even turned the space-time where the planetary fortress was located into an illusion. At this moment, only Luo Fan and the universe obliteration cannon were left at the original location of the planetary fortress. Only a small portion of the universe obliteration cannon was left, and even its firing function was gradually disappearing. However, amidst such a terrifying scene, Luo Fan still had a smile on his face. His expression was calm and unhurried. It was really shocking to the extreme. At this moment, a faint gray light flickered around Luo Fan's body. A blurry, three-dimensional talisman appeared and disappeared from time to time. The terrifying heat that could even turn time and space into nothingness around him was compressed by the crystal wall outside and could not spread out. It could only shrink and increase its power. However, it could only make his three-dimensional talisman appear a little bit. This process lasted for quite a while. Only when the universe obliteration cannon couldn't take it anymore and finally disappeared completely did all these changes gradually calm down. Of course, this calming down only meant that the universe obliteration cannon had stopped firing and the heat no longer increased infinitely. However, it didn't mean that the heat would disappear immediately. It didn't mean that the interior of the crystal wall would return to normal immediately. After all, the crystal wall outside was a terrifying barrier that even the previous attacks couldn't break. It was so airtight, so complete, and didn't transmit heat. Under such circumstances, how could the heat inside be dispersed so easily? Under normal circumstances, the heat inside would indeed continue to weaken, but the speed of that weakening would be unimaginably slow. It might even take billions of years before it could completely return to normal. Is that all? Luo Fan looked around and couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. Such a terrifying attack might be fatal to ordinary cultivators, but to cultivators who could withstand the universe obliteration cannon, such an attack was nothing. If it was really only this attack, then there would be no need for the space-time modifier's energy to exist here. Just as Luo Fan was thinking about this, the crystal sphere suddenly changed slightly. The surrounding temperature suddenly rose along with this change. Moreover, The speed of the increase was also getting faster and more terrifying. It was as if there was no limit at all. There's a change indeed. This is interesting. Luo Fan's eyes instantly lit up. He had already discovered the changes that were happening to the crystal sphere. At this moment, the crystal sphere was resolutely shrinking. This shrinking speed wasn't considered fast. However, it was almost unstoppable and unstoppable. The shrinking of the crystal sphere produced an indescribable compression force on the heat inside the sphere. Under this compression force, the heat inside the sphere was compressed to the point where it could not be measured at all. Under this compression force, the terrifying heat that could originally completely turn time and space into nothingness continued to grow. Under this heat, the nothingness of time and space also gradually dissipated. A strange state that seemed to be neither there nor nothing gradually appeared where Luo Fan was. Faintly, Luo Fan could even feel that an indescribably great existence had appeared around him. It's actually the unseen. Seeing this, Luo Fan couldn't help but smile helplessly. As it turned out, the place where the heat was burning was none other than the unseen place where the great Tao resided. The great existence that he could feel through the heat was something similar to the great Tao in this universe. After the heat became so terrifying, the three-dimensional talisman around his body finally fully manifested. The complicated and profound three-dimensional talisman moved crazily around Luo Fan's body, and all sorts of unfathomable profoundness kept seeping out from it. The surrounding heat that had been burned to nothingness was completely isolated by the three-dimensional talisman. Not only did it not harm Luo Fan, who was protected by the three-dimensional talisman, its greatest function was to make the three-dimensional talisman around Luo Fan's body even more mysterious, clearer, and more powerful. Back when the planetary fortress exploded, under the bombardment of a universe extermination cannon that was thousands of times more powerful, the three-dimensional talisman around Luo Fan was slightly damaged. However, at this moment, under the even more terrifying heat, the three-dimensional talisman became clearer and more powerful. The reason for this was very simple. When Luo Fan repaired the three-dimensional talisman, he directly strengthened its heat resistance effect. In fact, he had fused his will into the three-dimensional talisman in the form of words, allowing everything in the universe and the chaos to read these words, and thus naturally bestowed its power to the three-dimensional talisman. Feeling the effect of the increasing heat in the surroundings, Luo Fan finally lost interest. He felt that the effect of the increasing heat in the surroundings was only pushing him deeper into the darkness. Whether it was the unseen depths or the gap between the universe and the chaos, they were like his back garden to Luo Fan. So what if he was pushed into the gap between the universe and the chaos? Could it give him any sense of novelty? Since it could not give him any sense of novelty, Luo Fan naturally had no interest in sensing the changes after the crystal wall shrank. With a thought, he turned into a stream of light and rushed out. In an instant, he broke through the unseen depths and rushed into nothingness. Then, he broke through the layers formed by the interweaving rules and laws and rushed into the normal space-time. At this moment, his position was already close to the crystal wall that originally enveloped the planetary fortress. He raised his hand and slapped it lightly. Bang! A hole with a circumference of 10 meters was blasted open on the crystal wall, and then countless strands of terrifying heat surged out of the hole and burned the space outside into nothingness. Chapter 1136. The crystal wall shrunk rapidly. The hole that Luo Fan blasted open was like the muzzle of a cannon. As the crystal wall shrunk rapidly, it constantly spewed out terrifying heat, turning a large area of space-time in front of the hole into nothingness. This process lasted for a few breaths. After a few breaths, the crystal sphere had turned into a small crystal. It was a crystal that seemed to have no size and no distinction between inside and outside. Outside the crystal, there was a cone-shaped nothingness that stuck to the crystal. Luo Fan suddenly frowned. He lifted his foot and took a step forward. In the blink of an eye, he arrived next to the crystal. Then he stretched out his hand to cover the crystal. In an instant, an indescribable space-time fluctuation appeared out of thin air and enveloped the crystal. At this moment, the crystal shook violently. The space-time fluctuation that enveloped Luo Fan shook violently. It was like a wild beast that was caught by a hunter and was struggling. In the process of this struggle, the crystal wall seemed to be slowly becoming illusory, as if it was about to disappear. Still want to run? It's not that easy, Luo Fan shouted faintly. He raised his hand and pointed at the crystal. A strong and unparalleled will suddenly poured into the crystal through his finger. As his will poured in, the crystal began to struggle even more violently. Then, with a soft bang, a large area of the surrounding space-time instantly collapsed. This kind of collapse was different from the previous state where it was burned into nothingness by the heat. Instead, it was like glass being shattered. The fine shattering made the surroundings seem to be shrouded in fog. Even Luo Fan's figure was covered by the fog. After that, the crystal finally calmed down completely, lying quietly in Luo Fan's hand. It looked like an ordinary crystal, completely unlike the previous crystal wall that could turn space-time into nothingness that the heat couldn't do anything to. He waved his hand gently. The thick fog in the surroundings instantly disappeared as if it had never appeared. Let me see what other secrets you have inside, Luo Fan said calmly. His will rushed into the crystal and fused with his will, forming something like a projection. It appeared inside the crystal. The inside of the crystal was not as narrow as it looked from the outside. Inside the crystal was a boundless starry sky. The starry sky was filled with endless starlight. At first glance, it looked exactly the same as the universe Luo Fan was in. However, upon closer inspection, one would discover that the boundless starlight was merely an illusory existence. Only the surrounding area, which was about the size of a star, was real and had complete space-time. It was an area where the laws of nature existed. However, this region did not feel as if it was purely a void. Instead, it felt as if there was some sort of indescribable existence here. This kind of existence was nothing else but a strange star, a star that was shapeless and intangible, with only a kind of abstract quality. Luo Fan looked at this area. His eyes narrowed, and his angle of observation instantly changed. The entire star appeared in front of him. He looked at the star, and a look of realization appeared on his face. So that's how it is. It actually completely preserved the mark of the original living beings in this star. The space-time modifier actually has such a function. Such a thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind. At this moment, the star in front of Luo Fan was the planetary fortress that he had been in previously. It was also the planetary fortress that had been completely destroyed by the combined power of the universe obliteration cannon and the space-time modifier. Inside the planetary fortress, the living beings that originally existed in the planetary fortress acted as if nothing had happened. They were still living on the planetary fortress. One could not see the despair they had felt previously, and they would never have imagined that they had completely disappeared along with the planetary fortress. With Luo Fan's knowledge, he could tell at a glance that these were not real living beings. They did not look like the original people. They looked the same as before, but in fact, they were just some marks. These marks preserved everything about these living beings. They contained all of their memories, all of their experiences, and all of their futures. If there was a special method to remove these marks and give them bodies and souls, then these marks would be able to grow back into the original living beings. There would be no change at all, not even a drop. This was obviously the power of the space-time modifier's energy. Such an unbelievable power could definitely be considered to be creating reincarnation. Very good technology. Luo Fan could not help but feel emotional as he looked at all these things. He now understood what was going to happen to the crystal wall just now. Just now, the crystal wall was clearly going to bring these marks back to where the space-time modifier was. It was either to return to its interior or to its side. If Luo Fan had not stopped it just now, the crystal wall would have disappeared in front of him. Originally, The disappearance of these marks should not have affected Luo Fan much. However, it was obvious that if he did nothing and allowed them to disappear in front of him, Luo Fan would not be Luo Fan. Moreover, it was not useless for Luo Fan to stop them now. At least, Luo Fan already knew that the space-time modifier had the ability to retain marks. In the future, when he went up against the space-time modifier, he would be prepared and would not make mistakes because he did not know about it. Since he understood the effect of his position, he was no longer as confused as before when he looked at the starlight that filled the sky. This position was where the marks of those living beings were kept. In that case, the illusory starlight in the outside world was naturally of the same nature. The reason why they were illusory was probably because they were not really here. The reason why the starlight appeared for Luo Fan to see was because this place was also modified by the space-time modifier and had an extremely special connection with those places. Therefore, the light could pass through the starlight and arrive here. Seeing this clearly, Luo Fan did not have the mood to stay here any longer. With a single thought, his will instantly broke through the barrier and rushed out of the crystal wall. He returned to his body. Hovering in the void, Luo Fan looked in the direction of the center of the country of eternity, where the huge star and planet were located. There was a vague, indescribable, mysterious existence there. It emitted an indescribable aura that enveloped the entire unbelievably huge country of eternity, tightly connecting the billions of stars and counties in the country of eternity. Judging from what he saw inside the crystal wall just now, every star in the entire country of eternity should have the energy of the space-time modifier. Similarly, there should also be a substance similar to the crystal wall. The energy in the crystal wall built a huge reincarnation system for all the living beings in the country of eternity, so that all the marks of the living beings in the country of eternity could be retained in the crystal wall after their death, and they could return to the universe through various special methods. Regaining life, thus on a different level, allowing all the living beings in the country of eternity to live a long life. Although it's not a cultivation civilization and there's no real reincarnation, to be able to build an alternative reincarnation through such a method, it seems that the technological civilization isn't as bad as I thought. Luo Fan sighed. After sighing, he raised his hand and grabbed at the void, directly breaking through time and space. He broke through the layer of rules and laws, the layer of nothingness, and even the unseen, entering a dusky place. It was a place that belonged to the gap between heaven and earth and primal chaos. After arriving here, Luo Fan casually grabbed at a strange, dusky existence and abruptly pulled his hand back, bringing the dusky existence to the normal space-time. It arrived in front of him. Looking at the dusky existence, Luo Fan casually waved his hand, and the dusky existence turned into a three-dimensional talisman, which gently wrapped around the crystal wall. After that, Luo Fan covered it with the universe inside sleeve and put it into his universe inside sleeve. The reason for this defense was simple. It was to prevent the space-time modifier from discovering Luo Fan through the existence of the crystal wall. Luo Fan was quite unfamiliar with the various aspects of the space-time modifier, so it was obviously the right choice to do everything he could to defend himself. After doing all this, Luo Fan raised his foot and strode forward. His figure flickered between the void, and he headed towards a certain county in the country of eternity. This time, Luo Fan's speed was not too fast. The county that he chose was not the nearest county, but a very special one. It was a planet that he had previously inquired about in the information contained within the planetary fortress. Therefore, it took him more than half a day to arrive outside this galaxy. This galaxy looked very ordinary, similar to the Guotuan County that Luo Fan first saw after entering this universe. The stars were not big, but there were a lot of planets. Most importantly, the level of technology was similar to that of the Guotuan County. Luo Fan could even sense an existence similar to the flame giant in this central star. Of course, although it was similar, the technology used was different, the appearance was also different, and even the fighting style was vastly different. This is it. As soon as Luo Fan saw this place, he nodded in satisfaction. The level of technology of this county was definitely at the bottom of the entire country of eternity. In other words, this county was definitely at the bottom of the entire country of eternity. In other words, it was equivalent to a village in the third world on Earth. If one wanted to infiltrate such a place and obtain an identity in the country of eternity, it would be the easiest place compared to other places. Recalling the reason why he was discovered in the Guotuan County, Luo Fan completely restrained his perception this time and only used his superior eyesight to observe the situation in this galaxy. In the end, he locked on to the most prosperous planet in this galaxy, turned his figure into nothingness, and headed towards that planet. After a while, he landed on the surface of that planet. The degree of prosperity of this planet was not much different from the capital or county of the Guotuan County. In fact, to some extent, Shanghai was much more advanced than the Guotuan County. The entire planet was densely packed with objects that looked like science fiction. There were hovercrafts, teleportation lights, holographic images, floating cities, and so on. Compared to this planet, Luo Fan's hometown before he transmigrated was at least thousands or even tens of thousands of years behind. Luo Fan's amazing eyesight had reached an unimaginable level. Sweeping his gaze across, he had already grasped the vast majority of the situation on the surface of the entire planet. Although it was not as detailed as using his perception, it was enough for him to find the location he needed. Still in his invisible state, he pressed his figure down and directly arrived at a government agency on this planet. Here, the entire county was in control. In other words, it was the proof of identity of everyone on this planet and all the other planets in this galaxy. The existence of anyone in this galaxy was legal, whether they had any criminal records, where they were born, where they grew up, what they did when they were young, what they did when they grew up, and so on. And so on and so forth. Everything was under the control of this organization. Therefore, if Luo Fan wanted to have the identity of a resident of this country of eternity, the best way was to control the staff here, create an identity for himself, or let himself take someone's identity. After seeing the memories of several people, Luo Fan was no longer unfamiliar with the advanced technology here. He easily walked into the extremely gorgeous and magnificent building of this agency. Most of the machines here were automated, but as such an important area, there were naturally many staff. Someone immediately came up to ask Luo Fan. When he learned that he was here to reapply for an identity card, he brought him to an office. Here, a middle-aged man was sitting there. His body could only be considered strong, full of vitality, and he had at least a few hundred years of lifespan. Just as the middle-aged man was about to speak, Luo Fan had already lost his patience. He raised his hand and pointed at the middle-aged man. All the middle-aged man's memories were completely grasped by him. After grasping the memories, he directly controlled the middle-aged man to operate the complex equipment he mastered, easily creating an identity for Luo Fan, replacing the identity of a dead person on this planet who still had his identity. Of course, this person's original name was not Luo Fan, but Luo Fan had no interest in calling other people's names. Otherwise, he could directly control any person on this planet, directly know everything about them, and then replace them. Why would he go through the trouble of coming to this government agency to directly modify it? Therefore, he directly controlled the middle-aged man to change the person's name, directly changing it to Luo Fan. This was not difficult, nor was it rare. No matter what world, it was impossible for everyone to be satisfied with the name given to them by others, even if it was their own parents who gave them a name. This star system that was tens of thousands of times more advanced than Earth technology was naturally no exception. Therefore, Luo Fan controlled the middle-aged man to change the name of the identity he replaced. This happened almost all the time. No matter where it was, no one would suspect it. After doing this, Luo Fan directly erased this part of the middle-aged man's memory. After the middle-aged man woke up, he generously greeted him, saying that he did not want to change his name, and then swaggered out of the agency. After leaving, Luo Fan did not want to delay any longer, so he directly went to buy a ticket to the capital planet. Anyone in the entire country of eternity could go wherever they wanted to go, and the capital of the country of eternity was no exception. However, unless one had sufficient qualifications, no one could stay there for more than a week, which was the total amount of time a person spent there in their lifetime. In other words, although people who were not qualified to go to the capital could also go there, they could only go there for a vacation. The identity Luo Fan used was only that of an ordinary person, so of course he was not qualified to live in the capital permanently. Therefore, he could only go there for a vacation. Fortunately, this person did not use up the time to go to the capital, so there was still a chance to go to the capital. Otherwise, Luo Fan could only change his identity. When Luo Fan sat on the spaceship to the capital, half a day had passed. If the space-time modifier can still detect my existence, then I can only say that I'm impressed. Luo Fan sat cross-legged on the bed in the spaceship room, such a thought flashing in his mind. That's right, the reason why he did so many seemingly unnecessary things was to have a reasonable and legal identity to avoid the detection of the space-time modifier, so that he could easily enter the huge planet and get as close to the space-time modifier as possible. Otherwise, he would be discovered as soon as he entered the range of the space-time modifier, and thus suffer the space-time modifier's attack. Although he didn't think that he was powerless in front of the space-time modifier and could only be trampled upon, the power of the space-time modifier was too shocking, after all. It wasn't a pleasant thing to be attacked before they even came into contact with each other. Compared to Luo Fan's own speed, the flying speed of this spaceship was much slower. If Luo Fan walked at full speed, it would only take a few breaths at most to reach the center of the country of eternity from the star system. Even if he walked slowly and stopped while walking, it would not take more than 3 days to reach the destination. Chapter 1137. Evidently, Luo Fan had a month to wait before arriving at the capital of the Everlasting Kingdom. During this period of time, with Luo Fan's style of filling up all of his time, it was certainly impossible for him to waste it like this. Sitting cross-legged on the bed in his room, Luo Fan's mind slightly moved. His mind suddenly withdrew and entered a mysterious and strange place within his body. Here, there was a strange crystal floating in the void of time and space. The crystal was extremely mysterious as it slowly rotated in the space of nothingness. A light that seemed to be composed of countless souls was constantly expanding and contracting around the crystal like a beating heart. The moment Luo Fan arrived, the crystal trembled slightly. Following that, all the strange phenomena disappeared. A beautiful woman with an indifferent expression appeared next to the crystal. It was the Air Maiden. "You're here." The Air Maiden looked at Luo Fan with joy in her eyes and said. Luo Fan nodded and said with a smile, "Well, I'm here. I have a month this time. Then why don't you follow me into the magic treasure to take a look and guide me along the way?" The Air Maiden was even more delighted. This was Luo Fan's purpose for coming here, so he naturally wouldn't have any objections. He immediately nodded and came to the side of the air hostess, pulling her towards the crystal. Their figures disappeared in an instant, and the crystal once again emitted rays of light that seemed to be composed of countless stars. They moved and shrank around the crystal, trembling and trembling like a heart. At this moment, Luo Fan and the Air Maiden felt that they had fallen into a boundless golden ocean. Countless souls, whether noble or ugly, clear or chaotic, powerful or weak, shuttled past the two of them in an instant. This magic treasure was a universe that Luo Fan had created himself. Then, he pushed the universe to an unimaginable peak and refined it. The minds of all the living beings in it were materialized by him, becoming existences that could be read and comprehended by the controller of the magic treasure at will. These specks of light that formed the boundless golden ocean were the souls. After pulling the air hostess into the magic treasure, Luo Fan returned the control authority to the air hostess. He let the space maiden lead him to choose the soul she wanted to sense. Soon, they landed in the most powerful and noble soul. Here, there was a world of boundless light. This was the spiritual world of the mind, or the mental image world. It was a world formed from the moral and worldview of all living beings. This boundless world of light represented that the thoughts of the living beings were all positive and positive. On the other hand, if it was a world of darkness, it meant that the thoughts of all living beings were negative. Into this bright world, the Space Maiden turned into an unparalleled goddess and wielded the highest authority in this world. Luo Fan also turned into a god king and stayed by the goddess's side, wielding the same unparalleled authority with her. Sensing the changes in his body, Luo Fan could not help but smile. Looks like you've already established great authority among these countless souls in just a short period of time. The air hostess also smiled. Back then, in order to search for the characteristics of all the souls, I used my searching ability a few times. I've used the Search Divine ability a few times, and it must be at that time that made them feel that I'm supreme. She naturally knew what Luo Fan meant. This was the spiritual world of the living being. Everything here matched the living being's understanding. If the air hostess was a complete stranger to the living being and did not have any concept of her, she would only become a passerby after falling into the spiritual world. She would become an ordinary substance or living being with no sense of existence. The fact that the air hostess could turn into a goddess meant that she was unparalleled in the eyes of the living being, even if he had not actually seen her before. However, as the living being's subconscious, he could already sense that there was something familiar about the air hostess, so he naturally corresponded it with the image of the goddess. As for Luo Fan, there was no need to mention him. He was the creator of this universe, and the creator who had guided this universe to become what it was today. His dignity was naturally engraved in the depths of the souls of all living beings. If he fell into the spiritual world of any living being, he would undoubtedly be a supreme existence like a god king, a holy lord, or a god. There was no other possibility. The two of them looked at each other and smiled. They strolled around the spiritual world hand in hand, carefully savoring the unique concepts of the various living beings revealed in the spiritual world. For Luo Fan, who had already formed his own worldview, this was just a pastime. He did not gain much. However, for the air hostess, who had yet to form her own worldview, even if the moral and worldview of this living being were very rough and had many mistakes, it was enough to have quite an impact on her. She would gain new insights from time to time. In the spiritual world, the flow of time was not synchronized with that of the outside world. Generally speaking, the flow of time in the spiritual world was faster than that of the outside world. This was easy to understand. When ordinary people plan things, wouldn't they develop over a few years or even a few decades in a short period of time? Didn't this mean that the flow of time in the spiritual world had developed over a few years or even a few decades in a short period of time in the outside world? Therefore, although Luo Fan only had a month's time, he had far more than a month's time in the spiritual world where he could move around freely. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan and the air hostess were not in a hurry. Instead, they walked leisurely. They spent 3 to 4 years walking through this boundless world of light. After that, they did not stop. They directly left this boundless world of light and stepped into another boundless world of darkness. After staying here for a few more years, they changed to another spiritual world. Just like that, one after the other, several thousand years had passed unknowingly. During the walk, Luo Fan did not directly explain any cultivation methods to the Space Maiden, nor did he give her pointers on how to construct her own worldview. Instead, he told her about the spiritual worlds, that the composition of these spiritual worlds represented the mind of living beings and the worldview of living beings. That was the morality of living beings. Unknowingly, the air hostess gradually became familiar with different worldviews. She gradually came to know that worldviews existed. Through the various differences in worldviews and morals in her spiritual world, Space Maiden gradually discovered many flaws that she had left behind in her cultivation, and she gradually made up for them. On this day, Luo Fan and the air hostess arrived at a spiritual world that looked almost identical to the universe that Luo Fan had created. Seeing such a spiritual world, the air hostess was shocked. She said to Luo Fan, "How can this person's spiritual world be like this? Could it be that this person has no emotions?" After seeing so many spiritual worlds, the air hostess had a rather deep understanding of the structure of spiritual worlds and the special relationship between living creatures. Any living creature that had emotions would definitely be affected by their emotions and become somewhat distorted. It might be difficult to understand if one were to talk about spiritual world alone. However, if one were to describe it in another way, the situation would be very clear. However, if one were to describe it in another way, the situation would be very clear. When the sun shone dazzlingly, they would feel so uncomfortable that they wanted to curl up into a ball and not go out. The sun was dazzling, and he felt so uncomfortable that he wanted to curl up into a ball and not go out. If it was a cloudy day, it would be even more unbearably dark. Not even light could be seen, and everything was blurry. It would make one feel like dying. On the other hand, if he was in a good mood, he would feel that everything was fine. On the other hand, if the sun shone brightly, they would feel cool and comfortable. On the other hand, if the sun shone, they would feel cool and comfortable. If the sun shone like that on the real world, the influence on the spiritual world that could change according to one's heart would only be greater and more shocking. The spiritual world that Luo Fan and the air hostess had visited previously. In addition, the many spiritual worlds that the air hostess had visited were all normal spiritual worlds. In other words, they were all vastly different from normal worlds. Due to the fluctuations in the emotions of living creatures, they would constantly change. They would produce all sorts of inexplicably distorted worlds. Even the spiritual worlds that were most similar to their real world only looked similar on the surface. There were still many huge differences and shocking distortions inside. At this moment, the world in front of Luo Fan and the air hostess was completely different. From the inside to the outside, be it the astronomical phenomena on the surface or the structure of the world in the deepest layer, everything was completely the same as their real world. How could the air hostess not be shocked by such a strange phenomenon? She even suspected that the owner of this spiritual world was an existence without emotions. It's not that he has no emotions. In fact, he has more emotions than anyone else. Luo Fan looked at the spiritual world and could not help but praise it in his heart. However, he said this to the air hostess. Then why is his spiritual world so similar to their real world? It's not distorted by his emotions at all. It's not affected by his emotions at all. The air hostess could not help but be surprised. Luo Fan naturally knew what was going on. However, he did not intend to tell the air hostess the reason. Instead, he planned to let the air hostess find out the reason herself. The reason why this living creature's spiritual world could be so real and so similar to the world he was in was none other than the fact that this living creature had initially established its own firm worldview. This worldview was different from the worldview that cultivators needed to establish to explain everything in the chaotic state. Instead, it was a simple worldview that allowed one to know the source of all the surrounding phenomena, to have no doubts about all the phenomena happening around them, and to have a firm belief in the principles behind them. This worldview could not make him a cultivation genius, nor could it be the concept that a cultivator relied on to become a sage. However, it had already revealed some of the embryonic form of a true worldview. From this, one could see the significance of a cultivator obtaining a worldview that truly belonged to himself. If such a simple worldview could prevent the spiritual world of a living creature from being affected by all emotions and emotions, then a worldview that truly belonged to a cultivator might be able to prevent the cultivator from being affected by all changes in the outside world and the chaotic state. This was something that Luo Fan could also say. However, the effect that he said and the effect that the air hostess saw and experienced were worlds apart. It was almost as big as the difference between cultivating a cultivation method taught by others and cultivating one's own cultivation method. Moreover, they were not in a hurry. Both Luo Fan and the air hostess had plenty of time to waste. Therefore, Luo Fan decided to leave this doubt for the air hostess and let the air hostess see for herself. She would feel and experience the mysteries revealed in it by herself. The air hostess looked at Luo Fan's smiling face and smiled. She understood his intention and did not ask any more questions. She just began to walk in this spiritual world and carefully sensed all kinds of things in this spiritual world. Then, she analyzed this spiritual world according to what Luo Fan had told her in the many spiritual worlds and experienced its mysteries. During this process, time gradually passed. Suddenly, one day, Luo Fan trembled slightly and said to the air hostess, "It's almost time, but I have to leave now. You don't need to be anxious about the mysteries of this spiritual world. Think quietly and comprehend. You don't have to stay in this spiritual world all the time. Go to other spiritual worlds and have a look. It might be better to comprehend through comparison. If you can comprehend something, it will be of great benefit to your future cultivation." The number of living creatures in this universe that Luo Fan had opened up had reached an unimaginable level. It had even exceeded the limits of what numbers could describe. Among such a huge number of living creatures, there would definitely be a lot of living creatures that could stabilize their spiritual worlds and not be affected by their own emotions. There would only be more spiritual worlds that were close to this level. That was why Luo Fan had said that. When the air hostess heard Luo Fan's words, she could not help but show reluctance in her eyes. All these years of traveling between the spiritual worlds of various living creatures with Luo Fan was the most wonderful and comfortable life that the air hostess had experienced in many years. During this process, she could feel a sense of satisfaction and relaxation at every moment, a sense of fullness. This made her wish that this kind of time could last forever. Now that she heard Luo Fan say that he wanted to leave, she was naturally reluctant. However, she also knew that Luo Fan had his own things to do. If she pestered him, she would only make things difficult for her or even annoy Luo Fan. Therefore, although she was reluctant, she could only nod calmly. "I will carefully experience it. You don't have to care about me. Go and do your own things." Luo Fan smiled slightly and held her hands. After looking at her for a moment, he gradually disappeared from this spiritual world. He did not stop at all as he disappeared from this magic treasure and returned to his body. The moment he returned to his body, he heard a broadcast from the spacecraft. "This flight will arrive in 15 minutes. All passengers, please prepare your luggage and get ready to disembark. This flight will arrive in 15 minutes. All passengers, please prepare your luggage and get ready to disembark." This was repeated 3 times in a row. "I've really arrived." Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. He went to the window of the room and looked out. He saw that the cosmic void that he had seen when he boarded the spacecraft had completely disappeared. In its place was an incomparably huge planet that covered the sky. The size of this planet had reached a shocking level. Looking out of the window of this room, the entire universe seemed to be covered by this planet. Even though he is still outside this planet, he can still see a thick atmosphere, but it still gives people the feeling that this planet has a round sky and a square earth. The land under the clouds is like an extremely flat and boundless land. "I'm already here. It seems that the space-time modifier didn't discover anything special about me." Luo Fan naturally won't be as shocked as ordinary people. He is currently looking at this planet, thinking about this in his mind. In Guotuan County, Luo Fan's perception was discovered by the detection equipment of Guotuan County. In this more technologically advanced planet, there is even a space-time modifier, so Luo Fan naturally needs to be more cautious. Therefore, he did not spread out his perception. He only felt that in the center of this huge planet, there seems to be a strange existence that can even threaten him. In addition, what that existence looks like, what incredible characteristics it has, and how powerful it is, he can't detect any of these. Unless he can spread out his perception without any scruples and personally contact that existence. Otherwise, his perception of that existence will only be limited to this level. After a quarter of an hour, the spacecraft landed on a port outside the planet. Regarding this, Luo Fan has already learned about it. The technological products on this capital planet far surpass any county in the country of eternity outside, and it's not just an ordinary surpassing, but a world of difference. This kind of transcendence made everything on the capital planet look so primitive and natural that no traces of technology could be seen. Because of this, all technological products from the outside world can't enter the capital planet. Even these spaceships that transport passengers into the capital planet can only dock at the spaceport outside the planet. Chapter 1138. After getting off the spaceship, Luo Fan was not unconventional. He was guided to a device that looked like a phone booth along with all the other passengers. It turns out to be energy transmission. With this level of technology, such a technology should indeed be developed. Luo Fan looked at the passengers who walked into the phone booth-like device one after another, and such a thought flashed in his mind. After he stepped into the device, he found that the space inside was more than 10 times larger than it looked from the outside. The surrounding light and shadows were flowing, and it looked like he had appeared in an illusory space. Not all of the passengers who had entered before him had been sent away. Instead, they were still waiting for the passengers behind them. When the number of passengers reached 100, a wave of energy surged out from all directions and enveloped everyone. For other passengers, being wrapped by this energy was nothing more than being wrapped around. In the blink of an eye, they had already crossed the vast space and arrived on the surface of the planet. But for Luo Fan, all the operation of this energy was felt by him at this moment without any reservation. This energy first caused the surrounding time and space to distort slightly. This distortion was not strong, and it did not even cause damage to the space-time structure of this universe. However, because of the integrity of the entire space-time, this distortion aroused the rebound of the entire space-time of the universe. It caused the normal space-time in other places to produce an indescribable force, and then all the matter wrapped by this energy, including living beings, crossed a long distance from the space-time port directly to the surface of the planet through some way that transcended space-time. When all the changes subsided, Luo Fan and the 99 passengers around him had arrived at a place that also looked like an illusory space. Passengers, please walk out of the teleportation room in order. You have now set foot on the surface of the capital planet. A leisurely and pleasant female voice came into everyone's ears, and then the door opened. An extremely rich energy poured in, making everyone feel inexplicably comfortable. Everyone could not wait to walk out of the place that looked like a door. As soon as they went out and looked back, they found that it was not the phone booth-like device that they had seen in the spaceport before. Instead, it was a pitch-black hole. It seemed that there were no traces of human creations on it at all. Clap, clap, clap. The sound of flapping wings came from above their heads, and then a white crane as tall as a man descended from the sky and landed in front of all the passengers. After the white crane landed, it didn't waste any time and explained the general situation of the capital planet to the passengers. It also provided many essential items for traveling, such as maps and transportation. There were tools to ensure safety, food and drinks, various places of interest and historical sites, and so on. The degree of completeness was really amazing. Of course, in contrast to this degree of completeness, the cost was also enough to make one's heart tremble. No wonder a person can only stay here for a week in their lifetime. If an ordinary person were to work for a lifetime, I'm afraid it would only be enough for him to stay here for a week. A tourist not far away from Luo Fan sighed with emotion as he listened to the white crane's introduction. Hearing this, Luo Fan smiled. He glanced over and found that it was a middle-aged man. He was dressed decently, but that was all. He didn't look luxurious at all. Obviously, he wasn't a rich person. When the man saw Luo Fan looking at him, he nodded to Luo Fan with a smile and said, "Hello, my name is Dorajimo. What's your name?" Luo Fan. Luo Fan had always reported his real name when he registered. This was the case even if he didn't have a legal identity, let alone his current identity. Good name. I think it's your first time here. Why don't we travel together? Before I came here, I studied the capital planet. Although the places mentioned by the guide also had good scenery, they weren't the most beautiful places on the capital planet. If I wasted my time on those places, I would have to pay for them. This time, we've spent our entire fortune on this trip, but it's all for naught. Dragum said to Luo Fan very enthusiastically. Huh, do you know any special places? How about I join too? At this time, a woman's voice interjected. Dorajimo frowned, obviously dissatisfied with the interruption, but when he looked back, he saw that the woman was not extremely beautiful. He discovered that although the woman's appearance was not extremely beautiful, she was still delicate and pretty. His expression instantly changed into a joyful one. He said, "Of course I welcome you. The more people, the better. How should I address you, miss? My name is Eisen. I also spent my family's fortune to travel to the capital planet. If this trip is a wasted trip, it would be a big loss." The woman first nodded to Luo Fan, then smiled. "That's right." Dorajun nodded his head in agreement. "Do you have anything to recommend?" "The scenery I heard from the guide just now is very good," Luo Fan said with a smile. "You're a classic example of being fooled. These guides are just man-made objects, equivalent to the robots in our county. Their setting is to send us away in the simplest way, and the places they point out are the most ordinary places. It's basically opened up for tourists like us. How can we really see the characteristics of the capital planet? In my opinion, the most important thing on the capital planet is our supreme creation, the space-time remodeling instrument. If we don't see the space-time remodeling instrument when we come to the capital planet, it's a waste of effort," Dorajimo said very proudly. With a beautiful woman standing next to him and watching, his desire to perform was greatly increased. Compared to when he was alone with Luo Fan, he was much more enthusiastic. Luo Fan originally just listened quietly to Dorajimo's words, and he didn't have much intention to travel with him. But now that he heard him mention the space-time remodeling instrument, he couldn't help but be surprised. Space-time remodeling instrument. That's the most important treasure of our country. How can it be open to tourists like us? I think you've been fooled, Luo Fan said deliberately. Eisen also looked suspiciously at Doraguru, obviously thinking that Luo Fan's words made sense. However, there was a look of anticipation in her eyes that could not be ignored. She clearly hoped that what Dorajurta said was true, and that she really hoped that she could see the space-time modifier. This was only natural. For all the residents of the Kingdom of Eternity, the prestige of the space-time remodeler had long been deeply rooted in their hearts. As long as one had the slightest bit of curiosity towards this great creation that was said to be able to create a new world, they would definitely be able to understand it. They were all looking forward to seeing it. Being stared at like this, Dorajimu became excited. "Of course I won't be fooled. The space-time modifier is not open for us to visit. However, in one place, we can see the appearance of the space-time modifier. At the very least, the space-time modifier's energy had appeared. I spent a lot of money to buy this travel guide. If it weren't for the fact that you two hit it off, I wouldn't have told you. I can see where the space-time modifier appeared. What is that place?" Luo Fan asked. "This is a secret. Now that there are so many people, why don't we walk and talk?" Dorajimu looked around and found that although most of the tourists had dispersed, there were still some who were discussing something in groups of 2s and 3s. Obviously, they had not decided where to go. With Luo Fan's cultivation, he could tell at a glance that although Dorajimu was hiding something, he was telling the truth. However, what he said was the truth. Moreover, even if he was deceived by him, he wouldn't care. Therefore, he nodded and directly agreed to Dorajimu's proposal. Although Eisen did not have Luo Fan's ability, the attraction of the space-time modifier overpowered everything. In the end, he nodded and agreed to Dorajimu's proposal. Since the three of them had already agreed, he did not hesitate to recite a code that seemed like an incantation according to the previous guide's words. As soon as the words were spoken, a soft roar came from the sky. Along with the roar, a creature that looked like a rhinoceros stepped on the void in midair and walked towards them. The rhinoceros did not look fast, but in just a few seconds, it had already walked in front of them from the void. Sure enough, it's still an energy creation. Luo Fan looked up at the rhinoceros and instantly saw through the entire structure of the rhinoceros like a butcher dissecting an ox. The rhinoceros was actually a product of energy materialization. All kinds of strange and special energy, under the action of some special mechanism, condensed into complex parts and combined into this vivid rhinoceros. They condensed into complex parts and assembled into this vivid rhinoceros. The previous white crane structure was just a mass of energy. Although it was materialized, there was not much special structure inside. Previously, the white crane structure was just a mass of energy. Although it had materialized, there weren't too many special structures inside. The previous white crane structure was just a mass of energy. Although it was materialized, there was not much special structure inside. It looked like a marionette, always under the control of some existence. Compared with the previous white crane, the white crane was like a tram connected to a wire, while this rhinoceros was like a car that burned gasoline. The difference between the two was this degree of freedom. After the rhinoceros landed in front of the three of them, it shook slightly. The energy parts inside were constantly changing, directly growing a hole in the middle like a car door. Through this hole, they could see that there were 3 luxurious seats inside the rhinoceros. It looked like a luxurious lounge. This was actually the reason why Duragmer had to bring Luo, Fan, and Eisen with him on this trip. It was too expensive to rent this rhinoceros. It was almost equivalent to Duragmer's income from working for several years. By bringing Luo, Fan, and Eisen, they could at least share the price and reduce the cost by 2/3. Why not? The 3 of them entered the interior of the rhinoceros and each picked a seat to sit down on. The door that the rhinoceros had opened before was closed again, but there were a few window-like holes on its back and shoulders. These holes were covered by an energy film, allowing them to see all kinds of changes in the outside world. Next, the rhinoceros stomped on the ground. Its body rushed straight up, and it began to walk in the air just like before. The whole process was so elegant and natural that Luo, Fan, and the other 2 did not feel any vibration at all, nor did they feel the knife-like air outside. This capital planet is really convenient. It would be great if I could migrate to the capital planet one day. Duragmer suddenly sighed. Don't even think about it. I heard that every resident of the capital planet is independent and doesn't rely on external help. Moreover, the technology and power each of them has mastered can easily compare to any county. If you want to migrate here, you must first have the financial resources to buy your entire county, Eisen said. I'm just saying, Duragmer said embarrassedly. How do the residents of the capital planet live? Luo Fan asked it this time. You don't know. When Duragmer heard this, he looked at Luo Fan as if he was looking at an ignorant idiot. That kind of inconceivable and unbelievable feeling was really unbearable. Luo Fan didn't care at all. He smiled faintly and said, I know a little, but it's only a rough understanding. Of course, I'm far worse than you. These words made Duragmer suddenly understand. Indeed, few people have such a deep understanding of the capital planet as he does. He even knows where to find the space-time modifier. Who can compare to him? Therefore, he nodded with satisfaction and said, It's true. Since you want to know so much, I'll tell you. After saying that, he glanced at Eisen and found that she was also looking at him with a burning gaze. He couldn't help but show a more proud look on his face. He said, The level of technology of the capital planet has far surpassed all the counties of the Eternal Country. Here, when all residents are born, they will be planted with something called a world seed by the space-time modifier. This world seed can grow with the growth of people. When they grow up to 120 years old, this world seed will grow into a real world. This world can create everything that the residents can understand. It can provide everything they need to survive, and even some powerful worlds. It can also transform and give back to the body, giving the residents unimaginable power. Therefore, the residents of the capital planet are actually their own independent world. They are self-sufficient and don't rely on outsiders. Even if they are thrown into the void of the universe alone, they can live extremely well. Having said that, Duragmer's eyes showed a look of envy. Eisen, who was next to him, also had a look of longing. Listening to this description, Luo Fan suddenly understood. He had an understanding of the way the residents of the capital of the Eternal Country lived. However, he was not fooled by Duragmer. The world seed, the world, I think it's at most a brain with a little space-time characteristics created by the space-time modifier. If it was a real world, every resident would probably be immortal. Why would they need the space-time modifier to create reincarnation? Such a thought flashed in Luo Fan's mind. Anyone, even ordinary people, as long as they have a real world, they can naturally easily obtain infinite power from the world, thereby completely replenishing all their consumption. Among them, including the consumption of life. This was, in another sense, achieving immortality. Obviously, although the residents of the capital planet of the country of eternity had extremely long lifespans, they couldn't achieve immortality. This clearly indicated that the world seed obtained by the residents of the capital planet wasn't a real world seed at all, let alone a real world. However, even if this was not a real world seed, not a real world, Luo Fan was still very interested in it. After all, this was a technological creation that Luo Fan had never understood. He could certainly see more creativity than the flame giant, which could give him more insights. Where do those residents live now? Why haven't I seen any of them? Eisen suddenly asked. They all live in their own worlds, hidden all over the planet. You think you haven't seen them, but maybe you've already seen them. Duragmar recovered from his envy and longing and sighed. Perhaps a certain tree you've seen before is a certain world, and a certain resident lives in it. Perhaps a certain stone you've seen is a world, a certain bird flying in the sky, a certain beast on the ground, and so on and so forth. Everything could be the world of a certain resident. Dragum casually pointed as he spoke. There was a deep sense of loss in his words. Was there anything more painful in this world than facing something you longed for and envied, but not being able to distinguish it at all? How could this be? Eisen's face was now full of shock. Although she knew about the capital planet, it was obviously only a general understanding. Her research was not very detailed. She only knew that the residents of the capital planet were very amazing, very powerful, self-contained, and did not rely on outsiders. She didn't know what kind of living conditions they had. Now that she really knew how they lived, she was shocked for a time. It was as if she had stepped into a great world that she could not imagine. At this point, the two of them had already lost the desire to talk. They quietly looked at the scenery of the capital planet below them, wondering if this was a world. And if that was a world, Luo Fan listened to the conversation between the two of them, secretly admiring them in his heart. Is this the same goal by different means? This technological civilization has developed to this level, and it is actually so similar to the cultivation civilization. These worlds are similar to the cultivator's cave. Such a thought flashed in his mind. With this thought in mind, he, like Duragmar, observed the various sceneries that streaked across the land below. Chapter 1139. Along the way, he shook his head inwardly. Contrary to Dorijimu's and Eisen's guesses, there were no worlds along the way at all. In other words, there were no residents of the capital planet. This was normal. The capital planet was so huge that even if one looked at it from space, it would seem like the sky was round and the earth was square. For the residents of such a vast planet who were self-sufficient and didn't need to rely on others, it didn't matter where they lived. Why did they have to squeeze into a place frequented by tourists and be treated as a tourist attraction? Mr. Dorijimu, can you tell us where we can see the space-time modifier now? Luo Fan figured out the cause and effect, so he wasn't interested in continuing to investigate. So he asked Dorijimu directly. The control of the flying energy rhinoceros was now in the hands of Dorijimu. At this moment, the direction of the flying rhinoceros was not in the direction of any of the scenic spots recorded in the map given by the guide, but in a direction that was completely unfamiliar to Luo Fan and Eisen. Obviously, Dorijimu should be controlling the flying energy rhinoceros at this time. Dorijimu and Eisen were awakened by Luo Fan's question and recovered from the previous shock. After Eisen heard what Luo Fan said, he also looked at Dorijimu curiously, obviously wanted to hear the answer to this question from him. After Dorijimu snapped back to his senses, he smiled slightly and said, "That place is called Eden. It is the only world seed factory that is open to tourists." Eden? Luo Fan was secretly surprised when he heard this name. On Earth, before he transmigrated, there was a legend about God creating humans. In that legend, The place where the world's first man and woman lived was called the Garden of Eden. Therefore, in that legend, the Garden of Eden was the origin of human beings. This factory produced world seeds, but it was named Eden. Yet it was named Eden. This made him wonder if the Garden of Eden was also a memory engraved in the life imprint of living beings. The world seed factory can be opened? That's impossible. Eisen didn't think so much at this time, and he exclaimed in surprise and anxiety. Why not? It was said that there were tens of thousands of world seed factories on the capital planet, and they were located in various areas of the capital planet. One of the factories is specially open for tourists to experience the power of the kingdom of eternity. What's so impossible about that? Duragmer said proudly. Since it's to promote the strength of the country, why isn't it marked on the tourist map? Luo Fan asked. There's a reason for that, although it was opened up in order to promote the strength of the country. However, as a factory for the seeds of the world, it was simply too important. Although the overall opinion of the higher-ups was that it should be open for tourists to visit, there were also many higher-ups who opposed it. Under this compromise, the current situation was formed. They were open to the public, but they didn't publicize it. Those who know about it are qualified to go there. Those who don't know about it are unlucky, Duragmer said. I see. That's great. Thank you, Mr. Dorajimo. If it weren't for you, our trip to the capital planet would have been in vain, Eisen said as he looked at Dorajimo. Ha! You're welcome. You're welcome. There's a reason why I'm taking the two of you there. The entrance ticket to Eden is too expensive. If 2 or 3 people go in together, there will be some discounts. I'm also saving some money for myself, Dorajimo said with a smile. Huh. At this moment, Luo Fan was suddenly surprised. It turned out that he actually found a very special tree on the ground below the flying energy rhino. This tree was nearly 10 meters tall, which was equivalent to a 3-story building. The whole tree looked similar to the other trees around it. Mixed with the other trees, it was as ordinary as a passerby in the crowd. It was difficult to distinguish, but Luo Fan could tell at a glance that this was not a tree, but a world, or rather, it was a resident of the capital planet. I actually found a resident here. It seems that there are quite a lot of curious people on the capital planet. Such a thought flashed in Luo Fan's mind. Although this place was quite a distance away from the teleportation point on this planet, it was still far from where they were teleported to. But compared to the entire planet, the distance was still too close. Logically speaking, at this distance, there should not be any residents of the capital planet who would be willing to come here to be a part of the landscape. But there was such a resident here. It must be said that this resident's curiosity was not strong. That was something that Luo Fan would not believe even if he were beaten to death. Luo Fan's eyesight was amazing. Not only did he have extraordinary penetrating and distinguishing abilities, but because he had integrated everything he cultivated into his body, he had all kinds of inexplicable magic powers. With just one look, he was like a butcher dismembering an ox. All the surface of the tree was completely turned into small parts, constantly dispersing in front of him, revealing its true appearance. This thing was called a world, but it was more like a living creature. A living creature with a certain space-time characteristic. It was constantly extracting the free energy in the void, absorbing the light shining down from the sky, absorbing the kinetic energy generated by the flow of the surrounding air, absorbing the electric current generated by the movement of the Earth's magnetic force, and so on. It could absorb almost any kind of energy. The interior of this thing wasn't a world as its name suggested, but a space that resembled an island. There was a strange ocean around the island, which was filled with liquid energy. The liquid energy slowly rotated around the island, constantly pouring into the island and providing power to the various living and working facilities on the island. The landscape on the island was very modern. Every detail seemed to have been meticulously crafted. Even the grass on the side of the road had been meticulously arranged to grow into a very perfect shape. Throughout the island, there were countless energy people busying themselves like servants. Some were cleaning, some were transporting, some were planting, and some were even playing around. In the center of the island, there was a building that looked like a divine king's palace. Inside the building, A graceful and luxurious young man was leisurely lying on a gorgeous recliner. Around him were 2 rows of people carefully serving him. In front of him, there were all kinds of fruits prepared, ready to be delivered to his mouth at any time, waiting for him to enjoy. Right in front of this man, a meticulous light and shadow revealed the appearance of a person that Luo Fan was quite familiar with. They were none other than the tourists who had stepped into the same teleportation point as Luo Fan. Among them were even the rhinos that Luo Fan and Dorijimu were riding. So that's how it is. The tourists treat them as the scenery, but they treat the tourists as the scenery. When Luo Fan saw this, he suddenly understood why there were residents of the capital planet so close to the tourists. He even vaguely understood. He also understood that the reason why the capital planet was open to tourists was not only to gather stronger cohesion, but also to provide the leisure and happy residents of the capital planet with all kinds of scenery that was different from the capital planet. At this moment, the light in front of the man flickered slightly. A man who was still graceful and luxurious, but he was not lying down leisurely. Instead, he seemed to be doing some kind of intense exercise. The light in front of the man covered up the light in front of him. He appeared in front of the man. Damn it, I was studying the characteristics of this group of tourists. The man who was half lying down was furious. He suddenly sat up and shouted, "Don't look anymore. I'll show you something good. If you miss it this time, you might have to wait for hundreds of years to see it again," the man in the projection said with a smile. These words obviously aroused the curiosity of the owner of this world. He raised his hand and waved, and the many energy people around him completely disappeared. The room he was in also turned into a completely dark void, leaving only the projection, which was even more conspicuous. It became even clearer. You better not be bragging. Otherwise, I'll ask after you every time you work with a woman. The people of this world warned. So vicious. The man in the projection widened his eyes and exclaimed, "Don't tell me you're really fooling me." The owner of this world was even more furious. "Not at all. You'll know when you see it." The man in the projection laughed a few times and disappeared in front of the projection. Then, the entire projection changed. A planetary fortress appeared in the projection. Outside this planetary fortress, it was a boundless starry sky, and there were sparse specks of starlight in it. The moment Luo Fan saw this planetary fortress, his eyes narrowed. He had seen this planetary fortress before. This was clearly the planetary fortress he had encountered before. That was the planetary fortress that was completely destroyed by the space-time modifier's energy. How could this scene appear? I clearly didn't feel anyone spying on me at that time. Such a strong thought flashed in Luo Fan's mind. This thought made his vigilance towards the country of eternity rise to a whole new level. If this country of eternity had the ability to spy on him without him sensing it, then the difficulty of dealing with him would increase by several levels. Just as Luo Fan was feeling surprised, the light and shadow had already begun to change. In an instant, a figure suddenly appeared on the outskirts of the planetary fortress. It was a figure shrouded in an invisible light, looking blurry and hazy. It seemed illusory and real at the same time, as if it truly existed in the universe, but at the same time, it seemed like it was just an illusion. As soon as Luo Fan saw this figure, he knew that it was him, even though he couldn't see the person's appearance. He couldn't even see the person's height, weight, and weight. After this figure appeared, it paused for a moment before diving into the planetary fortress. Then, after a few breaths, the planetary fortress shook violently. The red light almost enveloped the entire planetary fortress. Shrill warning cries came from all over the fortress. The entire planetary fortress looked like a frightened little girl. Soon after, the surface of the planetary fortress emitted traces of strange light. This light seeped out from the gaps between the various parts of the planetary fortress. It looked like the planetary fortress had been broken into pieces and was about to collapse and explode. The light that seeped out from the gaps became more and more intense. When it reached a certain level, The entire surface of the planetary fortress was suddenly shrouded in an indescribable crystal sphere. Then, the crystal sphere seemed to flash with a strange light, and the crystal sphere gradually shrank. Just when the owner of that world thought that the sphere would eventually shrink to the point of disappearing, a small hole suddenly opened on one side of the sphere. The figure that appeared in the void before walked out of that small hole. Endless heat surged out from that small hole, as if it was burning the projection to the point that it couldn't be maintained. Even the owner of that world could see that the space and time around the crystal sphere's small hole were constantly being turned into nothingness. And if this change only stopped at this moment, the owner of this world would only feel shocked and incredulous, and not have too many other feelings. But, obviously, the change didn't stop there. Just when the crystal sphere shrank to an extremely small size, the figure suddenly moved. In a flash, the figure had already arrived beside the crystal. He raised his hand and gently plucked the crystal in his hand. He held the crystal with one hand. Then, the crystal stopped changing and was taken away by the figure like an ordinary crystal. As the crystal was taken away, the projection gradually became blurry. In the end, it turned completely pitch black. Nothing could be seen anymore. Seeing that the projection had reached this level, the expression of the owner of that world changed drastically. There was an indescribable fear in the depths of his eyes. How is this possible? Could this be a special effect that you deliberately created? The owner of that world still couldn't believe it. Looking at his swallow, it was obvious that he was looking forward to hearing an affirmative answer from the other party. At this moment, the projection changed again. The figure that appeared previously appeared in the projection again. There was a look of excitement on his face as he said, "How is this possible? Do you think that with my technology, I can create such a vivid and lifelike image? Look at the transformation process of the crystal sphere and the destruction process of the universe obliteration cannon. Look at the process of the crystal sphere being taken away. Which part of it isn't completely real? Real. How is this possible? How can anyone survive the self-destructive bombardment of a universe obliteration cannon? Moreover, he can even split the crystal sphere. Even those life forms that we've captured in the past couldn't do this. Moreover, the owner of that world was gnashing his teeth as he spoke. He can actually take away the creation of the space-time modifier. How is this possible? The space-time modifier is supreme. Even in the advanced countries, it's an extremely advanced creation. How can its creation be taken away so easily? What you said might make sense, but what you saw earlier is the truth. It's the scene that the space-time modifier captured through time, backtracking the abnormal scene that happened at a guard base at the border a month ago. Whether you admit it or not, it's there. The man in the projection was obviously different from the owner of this world. However, he seemed even more excited and agitated. Why are you so excited? Don't you know that we've lost a guard base and hundreds of millions of our compatriots? The owner of this world was furious when he saw the man's excitement. Compatriots? Are you out of your mind? The man in the projection looked at the owner of this world as if he was a lunatic. What qualifications do these lowly people have to be our compatriots? As people of the nation of eternity, their lifespan is only a short 3,000 years. How can these people be considered residents of the nation of eternity? Only those like us who have a lifespan of at least 30,000 years can be considered residents of the nation of eternity. No matter how many of these lowly people die, it's only something that can be replaced immediately. So what? The man in the projection laughed. The owner of that world frowned and retorted. Although they can't be considered as real residents of the nation of eternity, they are still living beings and our compatriots in the eyes of the law. No matter how much you look down on them, you can't be so indifferent. Clearly, although the owner of this world wasn't as radical and extreme as the man in the projection, he clearly had a similar point of view. The source of dissatisfaction in his words was actually that the man didn't restrain his excitement. Let's not talk about them. Haven't you noticed? The man in the projection waved his hand nonchalantly and changed the topic. Notice what? The owner of that world frowned. A person who walks the path of self-evolution can actually be this powerful. Are you really not moved at all? The man in the projection said in disbelief. Although he's powerful, he ultimately can't compare to the space-time remodeling instrument. Otherwise, why would he seize a bit of the space-time remodeling instrument's creation? What can he do to me? The owner of that world said disdainfully. You can't say that. Although he doesn't seem to be comparable to the space-time remodeling instrument. The space-time remodeling instrument couldn't catch him after a whole month and couldn't even find a trace of him. This is enough to show that although he can't compare to the space-time remodeling instrument, he's not much weaker. Could it be that you were able to imagine such power in the past? The man in the image said. Chapter 1140. Of course. Then don't you think we can recreate our original research? The man in the image said to the owner of that world. You mean the research on using the world to modify one's self and evolve one's life essence? The owner of that world asked in surprise. Of course. Apart from that research, what other research has anything to do with this matter? The man in the image said excitedly. As he spoke, he waved his hands, feeling as if he had seen a world of unparalleled brightness and was only a step away from entering it. The owner of that world was quite calm and shook his head. You're being too arbitrary. The research department has done their research. Our world's overall energy is limited. Using it to support our work and life doesn't consume much, but once it is used to modify and evolve the body, it will consume a lot of energy. Once the world's energy is exhausted, it will be time for our bodies to die. Using the world's energy to modify the body and evolve the life essence is clearly exchanging lifespan for power. How unwise is that? Although this conclusion was made by the research department, is it necessarily true? At first, the research department said that self-evolution cannot be more powerful than modern weapons. But what do you think now? Didn't you see how powerful that person just now was? The man in the image shouted. That person is a special case. The research on the world's limited energy is not a special case, but a conclusion reached after countless experiments and probing. You'd better not challenge this conclusion. The owner of that world shook his head. I knew you were a coward. Forget it. If you don't want to do it, I'll do it myself. The man in the image snorted coldly, and the image disappeared. When the owner of the world saw this, he was shocked and quickly operated. After a long while, the image reappeared, showing a boundless pitch-black void. The man who appeared in the video also appeared in this void. Stop. This is not a joke. How long have you lived? Not even 500 years. Not even 500 years. You're risking your remaining 30,000 years of life for such a baseless guess. How can you face the people who care about you? The owner of that world shouted. We, the residents of the country of eternity, are absolutely independent existences. All of our decisions need only be made by ourselves. My current decision is also the same. That man was clearly very firm as he spoke. You, the master of that world, was furious, but he couldn't say anything to refute. The residents of the capital planet were self-sufficient, completely independent, and did not seek external help. This concept had long been deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. Everyone, not even residents of the capital planet, agreed with this statement. Under such circumstances, parents, relatives, friends, classmates, colleagues, and everything else couldn't force others to do what they wanted. Everyone could, and could only be responsible for their own decisions. He didn't need to care about what anyone else thought. Now that the man in front of him had given this reason, the owner of this world immediately realized that he had no reason to stop the man's decision. Suddenly, the owner of this world gritted his teeth and said, Fine, I won't stop you. However, even if you want to start research, you have to plan it well. It was too stupid and impulsive to carry out the body modification so rashly. Where are you? Now, wait for me to come over. I will research with you. Really? The man was overjoyed and shouted, You've always been the one with the highest attainments in life modification among us. If you join us, I'll be even more confident. Enough nonsense. Tell me the address, the owner of that world said in a very displeased manner. After all, originally, he didn't want to do this kind of research, but now that he was forced to join, of course he felt quite unhappy. You don't have to be so upset. This matter will also be of great benefit to you. If you're not interested in life modification, how could you have studied this subject so deeply back then? Now that this unprecedented research is in front of you, isn't this a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity? What's there to be unhappy about? The man laughed. I'm just unhappy. I was too unlucky back then. How'd I get to know you? The owner of that world snorted. Following that, an inexplicable wave was transmitted from extremely far away and entered this tree-like world. After receiving this wave, the owner of that world clearly knew where the man was. With a sigh, a thought emanated from his body and entered this world. Following this thought, the ancient tree trembled slightly and disappeared without a trace amidst the ripples in the void. From Luo Fan's perspective, this world should have traveled through time and space to a location that was hundreds of thousands of kilometers away from here. So that's how it is. No wonder the country of eternity's technology is so advanced, yet the lifespan of humans is so short. Luo Fan came to a sudden realization. Luo Fan had been watching the conversation between the owner of that world and the man, thinking that the rhinoceros that Luo Fan was almost floating in the air. In fact, the energy rhinoceros did not stop for even a moment. At this moment, Luo Fan was already thousands of kilometers away from that location. The reason why Luo Fan could still see the situation there during this process was only because of Luo Fan's amazing eyesight and the huge size of this planet, which allowed him to easily see the situation there from such a distance, and even hear their conversation with his eyes. Fortunately, I didn't peek directly, but used time recall to restore everything that happened in that location in the past. It seems that the power of this space-time modification instrument has not reached the point where I can't resist it. Luo Fan was quite relaxed at this moment. To be able to perform time recall and restore everything that happened in the past in a place that even time and space have been destroyed more than once, this ability was extremely powerful and difficult to defend against. But compared to being able to directly peep at Luo Fan without being discovered by him, the threat to Luo Fan is much smaller. Time recall can only tell where he has been and what he has done. Peeping directly, on the other hand, is far superior to Luo Fan's and even directly suppresses his perception of peeping. The gap between the two is self-evident. It goes without saying. We're almost there. At this moment, Duragmer's somewhat excited voice sounded. Luo Fan was awakened by this voice and looked forward. He saw a huge tree appear in front of them, or rather, in front of the energy rhinoceros. The height of this big tree was comparable to that of the tribal tree in the movie Avatar that Luo Fan had watched before he transmigrated to this world. It stood there. The degree of shock made Duragmer and Eisen completely lose the ability to speak. Of course, it was only the two of them who were shocked. For Luo Fan, although such a big tree is quite impressive, he has seen many of them, not to mention the wood door of the teleportation tree. Even when walking around the universe on Earth, he had seen many trees that were much bigger than this one. The vicinity of this big tree is not empty, but full of vitality. There are countless real and energy creatures. They either rely on the big tree to move or rise and fall on the big tree. It seems that they're transporting something into the big tree and then leaving after obtaining something from the big tree. It's a very prosperous scene. Just as the energy rhinoceros approached the big tree, a white crane descended from the sky and appeared directly in front of the energy rhinoceros, blocking its path. This is Eden, the world's seed factory. If you want to visit, please pay the necessary fees and abide by all the rules and regulations of Eden. If anything is damaged, you will have to pay the price. A friendly reminder, even a piece of bark in Eden could buy a planet. If you are not rich enough to rival a country, please try to be careful. The huge white crane said to Luo Fan and the others inside the energy rhinoceros. This white crane is actually condensed from energy, and it is similar to the guide from before. However, it looks a little more agile than the guide. It seems to be of a higher level than the guide. It really is like this, Duragmu exclaimed with great joy. Although he was the one who suggested coming here, he only learned about this place through other channels. Through other channels, he found out that this place is open to tourists and that tourists can visit it. As for whether this place is really open or not, he is not sure. From the time he learned about it until now, he is not sure whether the policies have changed, etc. At this moment, listening to the white crane, it is obvious that this place is really open. This feeling is like finally catching something that has already been booked, which naturally makes him very happy. As for the terrifying amount of compensation for the things in Eden, he is not surprised at all. After all, Eden is not an ordinary factory, but a world seed factory. The world seed is a noble creation that only the residents of the capital planet can have. Of course, it is impossible for such a creation to be leaked. Obviously, to prevent tourists from smuggling the world seed out, the best way is to make the tourists afraid, so that the risk they smuggle is greater than the benefits they might get. In this way, the method is very obvious, of course. It is extremely shocking compensation. In fact, it is not only here, but everywhere else is the same. When things are in good condition, they are not valuable. But when you destroy them, the value of those things will generally increase many times. Duragmer went forward to communicate with the white crane, and then a small energy palm slot appeared in front of the three of them. That is where the payment is. As a country that had advanced to such a level in technology, it was naturally impossible for them to still use currency, like paper money. It was no longer possible to use cards like bank cards to pay. They directly used a person's DNA as an existence similar to a bank card. How much wealth one had could be known by a scan of one's DNA. If one wanted to pay, they only needed to scan one's DNA and add a thought to it. Of course, Luo Fan does not care about money. After scanning more than half of the value of the identity he is now replacing, the energy white crane directly stepped aside, allowing the three of them to drive the energy rhinoceros into the range of the big tree. As soon as they entered the range of the big tree, Luo Fan felt an indescribable aura covering his body. This aura is an extremely powerful aura, and it feels as if even time and space seem to tremble slightly under this aura, as if any change in this aura will naturally cause a complete change in time and space. As soon as Luo Fan sensed this aura, he knew that it was none other than the aura of the space-time modifying instrument. The space-time modifying instrument is a technological creation. It is not a magic treasure refined by a cultivator, nor is it a cultivator. It should be a dead object, and it should not have an aura. However, it is obvious that a technological creation like the space-time modifying instrument has reached a certain extreme, and it will naturally affect the universe. Such an influence will cause time and space to change due to its existence, and thus form a feeling that is no different from an aura. This is the fundamental reason why a technological creation like the space-time modifying instrument would have such a wonderful aura. It has actually reached this point. Luo Fan felt this aura that actually did not exist, and such a thought flashed in his mind. Luo Fan can sense this aura that does not exist. Dorajmu and Aizen do not have this ability at all. After the two of them stepped into this place, they felt a sacred and powerful deterrent effect on them, making their bodies stiff and unable to move. However, they do not know that this is because of the influence of the aura, and they just feel that it is caused by the psychological shock of coming to this incredible factory, so they do not care. They just greedily looked at everything around them, looking at the many energy life forms that are busy around the big tree. Although most energy life forms are playing here like animals, there are also many energy life forms in human form who are busy doing all kinds of things that they cannot understand. This is a factory, after all, and of course, it is impossible to be completely natural. All right, you two, now that we have entered the factory, why don't we tour separately? Luo Fan naturally did not have the mood to mingle with Dorajmu and Aizen at this time, so he immediately suggested, "That's not good. The three of us will enter as a group. In principle, we cannot separate." Dorajmu came back to his senses and said with a frown, Yes, if we separate. What if we violate the rules here?" Aizen said the same. For the two of them, Eden is the noblest and most advanced place they have ever been to. It is the place with the highest status. Everything that happens here is naturally added with a layer of sacred light by the two of them. Even the rules of Eden are like this. In principle, I remember that in principle, it is usually this and that, and then it is usually followed by the next. As for what rules are broken, that is even less of concern. The rules and regulations we received did not say that we cannot separate it all. Luo Fan said with a slight smile. As he said that, he had already controlled the energy rhino to stop, and a small door appeared beside him. This energy rhino has always been controlled by Dorjimu, but it does not mean that Luo Fan and Aizen who entered the energy rhino do not have the authority to control it. If they did not have the authority to control it, they would be at the mercy of others. Seeing that Luo Fan had directly come out of the energy rhino, Dorjimu and Aizen hurriedly shouted, "Hey, wait!" As they spoke, the two of them also walked out of the energy rhino. After the three of them left, the energy rhinoceros shrunk to the size of a palm and stood on Dorgert's shoulder. "Where do you want to go? We will follow you." After all, they still did not dare to separate from Luo Fan. Seeing that Luo Fan was so determined, they looked at each other and said so. Luo Fan shook his head and smiled, knowing that he could no longer persuade them. He was too lazy to continue pestering them. He no longer cared about them and wandered around casually. He could feel the aura that did not exist in essence, so naturally, he could sense the direction of the source of the aura. Therefore, as he walked, he moved in the direction where the aura was the strongest. The place with the strongest aura was obviously in the depths of the tree. The height might also be at the top of the tree, which might be thousands of meters from the ground. The structure of the tree was very strange. It looked like a strange tower. There were a few gaps at the bottom that looked like doors. Inside the tree, countless roots were constructed in a special way to form a spiral staircase that led to an unknown height at the top of the tree. On both sides of the spiral staircase, there seemed to be rooms, and there were tree holes. Inside the tree, the number of energy animals was much fewer than outside, but the number of energy people was several times higher. These energy people seemed to be very busy, going in and out, going up and down. No one paid attention to Luo Fan and the other two at all, allowing them to move around freely. Sometimes, when they entered some tree holes, there would be one or two people who would come and greet them. They were not very enthusiastic, but they were not cold either. They would introduce various instruments that they could not understand, or introduce processes that they could not understand at all. Chapter 1141. After walking through a few rooms, Dorjimu and Aizen were extremely glad that they had shamelessly followed Luo Fan. This was because, according to their original thoughts, many of the rooms that they had walked through were places that they did not intend to enter. Now, under Luo Fan's lead, they directly barged in and actually saw many things that they could not imagine before. They had a vague impression of the production process of the world seed. Luo Fan naturally did not have the mood to stroll around with the two of them. With his ability, getting rid of the two of them was as easy as it could get. After passing through a few rooms, he had already left the two of them behind through a slight change in his speed. He wanted to reach the top of this large tree by himself. Dorjimu and Aizen were originally listening to an energy person talking about the production process of a certain material for the world seed with great interest. As soon as they came back to their senses, they realized that Luo Fan had already gone somewhere else. For a moment, they could not help but feel helpless. The two of them looked at each other and saw a kind of worry in each other's eyes. Of course, they would not be worried about Luo Fan. Although they had come together, they had only been together for such a short time. After all, how could they have established a deep relationship with each other? What they were worried about was themselves. They were worried that Luo Fan would cause some trouble and offend Eden, which would affect them and cause them to be unlucky. However, now that they could not find Luo Fan, they could only sigh helplessly, put away their feelings, and continue their previous journey. They continued to walk upwards, room by room. Unlike the two of them, Luo Fan's eyesight could easily see through the various obstructions of the tree. Just by walking up the spiral staircase, he could see the various situations inside the rooms on both sides of the staircase. In fact, there were even more things that they could see after entering it. Under such circumstances, he did not stop at all. He walked up unhurriedly. After an hour, he had already passed through the extremely tall tree and reached the top of the tree. There, he saw the true main body of Eden, which was also the place where the world seed was produced. Here, there was an energy person blocking Luo Fan. They were told that they could only watch from where they were and could not approach the main body of Eden. This is the end of the traveler's path. If you're willing, you can wait here. After an hour, 36 world seeds will be born. At that time, the space-time remodeling instrument would descend here and strengthen these 36 world seeds. Let this child have the potential to grow, the energy person said to Luo Fan after stopping him. Dozens of meters in front of Luo Fan was no longer in the shape of a tree. Instead, it was a strange existence that looked like a glazed sphere floating in the void. Under the illumination of the light emitted by the glass sphere, the surrounding trees seemed to have become transparent. Even the existence of the original trees could not be seen at all, making Luo Fan feel as if he had already stepped into the void. This glazed sphere was not a solid sphere, but a very strange one. It was like a space of its own, a world of its own. Under the cover of the glazed light, Luo Fan could easily see that there was an incomparably huge space within it. In that space, countless gigantic energy machines built a complex and huge whole, forming an astonishing energy machine. Many materials, artifacts, and energy produced by a large number of departments on the tree were continuously injected into the space inside the glazed sphere through some very secret channel. After the astonishing energy was continuously injected into the machine and through various modifications, 36 seeds that looked like 36 worlds were finally formed in the center of the glazed sphere. The seeds were oval in shape, had no head or tail, and had a smooth surface. Wisps of energy were constantly overflowing from various parts of the seeds, making the seeds seem illusory. They seemed ethereal. The entire glazed sphere was emitting an aura that did not exist in the nature of the space-time remodeling instrument. In other words, the aura that Luo Fan felt after stepping into this point. The aura that belonged to the space-time remodeling instrument did not come from anywhere else, but from this glazed sphere in front of him. Facing the words of the energy being, Luo Fan did not refute it forcefully. He just nodded and said, "Of course I'll listen to your arrangements, but I'll have to wait here for more than an hour. Can you prepare a place for me to rest? Even a chair would be fine." When the energy being heard that Luo Fan no longer insisted on crossing the boundary, he seemed to be quite satisfied. As for Luo Fan's request for a place to rest, it was just a small matter for him. After closing his eyes for a while, a rest platform appeared near Luo Fan. There were tables, sofas, and even some energy food on the platform. It was very harmonious with the tree, and there was nothing out of the ordinary about it. It looked like this rest platform had always existed here. Quite convenient technology. Luo Fan sighed in satisfaction and sat on the sofa, enjoying the enjoyment that he could not enjoy anywhere else. Seeing that Luo Fan did not have any more requests, the energy being retreated and went to do his own things. This was already the highest level of the tree, and there were only some sparse branches and leaves on the top of the tree that slightly blocked the sunlight. Looking up, the sky was clear, and the outline of the sun in the sky was unprecedentedly clear. "It's here." After dozens of minutes, Luo Fan suddenly raised his eyebrows. He faintly felt that there was an incomparably huge existence that was crossing the layers of space-time and rushing over. This existence's method of crossing space-time was extremely delicate and wonderful. The entire process produced almost no fluctuations. Even if Luo Fan crossed space-time by himself, if he did not specialize in concealment, he might not be able to reach this level of speed. At the same time, as this existence crossed space-time, the surrounding aura that belonged to the space-time remodeling instrument began to grow rapidly. Of course, Luo Fan could clearly sense such an aura. However, to the energy being in the tree, it was an aura that did not exist at all. It could not make them feel anything at all. Although the energy being looked like a real living being and was even more flexible and capable than a real living being, it was, after all, not a real living being. Therefore, it could not sense this aura that did not exist in nature. Luo Fan stood up and walked to the boundary that the energy being mentioned. He quietly looked at the glass sphere in front of him. All of a sudden, above the glass sphere, a huge dial with only a pointer and no scale appeared out of thin air. After this dial appeared, the aura that belonged to the space-time remodeling instrument instantly increased by thousands of times. The entire Eden trembled slightly because of this aura. It was as if it could collapse at any time and turn into dust at any time. This is the space-time remodeling instrument. Luo Fan looked at the dial without a scale, and such a thought flashed through his mind. He had seen this dial once when he was on the planetary fortress. However, what he saw back then was just a product of the space-time remodeling instrument's energy. It was not as clear as the real body in front of him. Moreover, it did not have the various wonderful performances of the real body. Around the space-time remodeling instrument, time and space combined in a very strange way. This combination was completely different from normal space-time. It looked like clay being baked into ceramics. Although the essence was the same, it looked like two completely different entities. After the space-time remodeling instrument appeared, the pointer trembled slightly. In an instant, 36 strange energy points floated out from the center of the dial. Slowly, it descended towards the glassy sphere. The glass sphere began to tremble slightly with this change. Then, it opened up, revealing a strange space inside. The 36 points of bizarre energy were directed at the center of the glass sphere, where the 36 world seeds were located. At this time, Luo Fan did not care about the 36 world seeds. At this time, he was focused on the space-time remodeling instrument that almost covered the sky in front of him. The space-time remodeling instrument looked like a simple dial with a floating pointer. However, at a glance, Luo Fan could see that this was just its appearance. The true form of the space-time remodeling instrument might be unimaginably huge. Perhaps even, he felt that it might even be bigger than the entire capital planet or the entire star of the capital galaxy. The reason why such a dial appeared was probably because the space-time remodeling instrument had used its own function to change space-time and hide the body that could only float in the universe. The only thing left in the outside world was this huge dial and the pointer on it. I can't see through it. Luo Fan carefully observed the space-time remodeling instrument and found that there was a layer hidden in the depths of the space-time remodeling instrument that was tougher than the crystal wall. It was an even more amazing barrier. Like the crystal wall, this barrier was also modified by time and space. However, it was a more advanced modification. Not only could it block all attacks, but it could also seal everything. It could also block Luo Fan's vision, which seemed to be able to see through everything. In fact, Luo Fan even felt that even his own perception might be blocked by this barrier. It's impossible to see through this space-time remodeling instrument from here. I have to enter it, or at least remove this layer of barrier before I can truly see through it. Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. At this moment, the space-time remodeling instrument suddenly stopped. The pointer on it trembled slightly. Then, Luo Fan had a feeling that he was being watched. This feeling of being watched was strong on the outside, but weak on the inside. It seemed to have an indescribably terrifying power, but it also seemed to be extremely inferior and not worth mentioning. What kind of person was Luo Fan? As soon as he felt this gaze, he instantly understood what was going on. This was clearly the controller inside the space-time remodeling instrument looking at him. The reason why it was strong on the outside, but weak on the inside, was because when he looked at Luo Fan inside, the space-time remodeling instrument had directly added an unimaginable power to it. Therefore, he appeared very strong. As for the weak on the inside, it was because even though he had the space-time remodeling instrument's additional power that could give his vision a special power, his innate nature that did not transcend mortals made it impossible for him to perfectly control this power. Therefore, he appeared weak on the inside. Sensing this spying gaze, Luo Fan was not angry. Instead, he was happy. For ordinary people, sight was an incomparably illusory product. Everyone knew of its existence, but no one could truly recognize where it was. However, for existences at Luo Fan's level, this was not the case. They could even materialize abstract wisdom. So what was the big deal about finding traces of vision? With great ease, Luo Fan caught the trace of this spying gaze. Tracing it back, he found the source of the gaze at a position that should have been a scale. The layer of barrier in the depths of the space-time remodeling instrument was wonderful and difficult to break. Even Luo Fan could not break it without alerting anyone. One could imagine how powerful it was. How could human vision penetrate such a powerful barrier? In other words, if the barrier was perfect now, this line of sight that was spying on Luo Fan, it would not exist. The existence of this line of sight meant that, at the source of the line of sight, there was a flaw in the barrier of the space-time remodeling instrument that should not have existed. This was obviously where Luo Fan's opportunity lay. He could not help but be happy. Luo Fan looked up at that position. His eyes flashed, and an indescribable thought directly attached to the line of sight that was spying on him. Following this line of sight, it directly rushed up, easily penetrated the barrier in the depths of the space-time remodeling instrument, and rushed into an incomparably huge world. At first glance, this world seemed almost boundless. But if one took a closer look, one would find that although there was a boundary, the entire space was the size of a star. In this huge space, there were countless parts densely packed together. Some of these parts were energy, some were physical objects, and some were even strange gases. There were all kinds of strange things, revealing all kinds of creativity that made Luo Fan secretly marvel. Among these countless parts, the source of the line of sight was a platform that looked like a hemisphere. On this platform stood more than a dozen men and women. Among these men and women, the men were graceful and handsome, while the women were noble and elegant, extremely beautiful. Standing there, they were equivalent to more than a dozen celestials that did not exist in the mortal world. And on the square of this hemispherical platform, there was a light screen. It vividly outlined a huge tree, showing who knows how many energy people were densely packed on the tree, and indicating the transformation process of many materials in the tree. Among them was Luo Fan, who was standing not far in front of the glass sphere. Luo Fan was there. It's actually like this. Fortunately, it's like this. When Luo Fan saw this, such a thought suddenly flashed in his mind. The power of this space-time modifier itself shocked him, making him feel that if he was not careful, he might be trapped by this space-time modifier for a long time, without being able to return. However, this space-time modifier was not a magic treasure of a cultivator, after all, and did not have a treasure spirit. It was also not like the flame giant, which was specially created to have intelligence. Therefore, although this space-time modifier was unparalleled and had enough energy to destroy heaven and earth, and could play with time and space as if it were plasticine, it could not move by itself. In other words, it had to be under the control of a living being in order to activate even the simplest functions. Such a design certainly made the space-time modifier safe, and a sudden malfunction would not destroy the entire country of eternity. But at the same time, this also made the space-time modifier unable to perform its functions perfectly. At least, in the face of a cultivator, a powerful cultivator like Luo Fan, it was impossible for it to perfectly display its function. And this gave Luo Fan a chance to easily subdue this space-time modifier. With a slight thought, Luo Fan's consciousness attached to that line of sight trembled slightly, and in the blink of an eye, it had already drilled into the eye of the living being who was looking at him through the light projection. Then, through that eye, it directly rushed into the brain of the living being and entered the depths of its soul. This living being was an extremely high-ranking person in the country of eternity. Otherwise, he would not have been able to be one of the dozen people controlling this space-time modifier. For such a high-ranking person, he would naturally have a lot of defenses against all kinds of strange attacks. There was even hypnosis protection, the space-time modifier's direct protection of his body the absolute autonomy of his mind, and so on and so forth. There is everything that could be thought of and couldn't be thought of. However, such a perfect defense might be extremely sufficient for a technological civilization and could defend against almost everything. But for cultivators and for Luo Fan, such a defense was like a sieve. At this very moment, he easily transmitted his consciousness into the depths of the living being's soul and completely changed the will of the living being in an instant. The moment the consciousness entered the soul of the living being, the body of the living being trembled violently, and the expression in his eyes changed in an instant. In his eyes, there was no longer the indifference and loftiness that he used to have. Instead, there was a kind of profoundness that reached straight to the source and saw through everything. Unknowingly, there was also an ethereal, noble, and indescribable aura of perfection added to his body. Chapter 1142. After turning this person into his avatar, all of this person's memories became Luo Fan's memories, allowing him to comprehend everything about this person in an instant. From a moment this person was born to the moment he saw this world, to the moment he saw Luo Fan, everything was revealed in front of Luo Fan. It turns out that the capital planet uses a parliamentary system, and this person is actually a member of parliament. Unfortunately, he isn't one of the 36 chairmen, although he has a lot of authority over the space-time modifying instrument. The space-time modifying instrument will be out of his control when facing any of the chairmen. Luo Fan looked at the person's memories and thought to himself. At this time, a woman next to him asked in surprise, "Jingliang Lu, what's wrong?" Through the person's memories, Luo Fan knew that the person's name was Jingliang Lu, and the woman was the closest to him among the dozen men and women here. She could almost be called a confidant. Her name was Lu Linlang. "It's nothing. I just don't see many tourists coming here. So I was a little curious," Luo Fan said while controlling the avatar. "Oh, I see. But now I'm blessing the world's seeds. So don't complicate things," Lu Linlang said in realization. "Of course I know what to do," Luo Fan's avatar said. While they were talking, the space-time modifying instrument had finished blessing the 36 world seeds. The space-time modifying instrument came here to bless this world. Now that it had completed the process, it wouldn't stay here any longer. It immediately controlled the surrounding time and space. With a slight tremble, it disappeared from the scope of the World Seed Factory and directly moved to another World Seed Factory. Once again, it performed the blessing action. This went on for hundreds of times. After blessing the last World Seed Factory, the space-time modifier once again shifted space-time. It directly appeared in a very strange place. Here, the surroundings were filled with a fiery red liquid. Scorching heat was constantly emitted from the liquid, burning the surrounding air and producing all sorts of unpleasant sulfur smells. At the center of the liquid was an invisible barrier that formed a hemisphere, creating a small space that could allow living beings to live in it. After the appearance of the space-time modifier, the invisible barrier trembled slightly and began to change. The scorching liquid outside disappeared and was replaced by the boundless starry sky of the universe. When Luo Fan saw this, he knew that this was the underground of the capital planet. It might even be the location of the capital planet's core. But now it was revealed. It should be the entire map of the Kingdom of Eternity, which was the star field that the Kingdom of Eternity currently possessed. This star field was not completely fixed at this time, but like a real universe, it slowly rotated in this star field according to the law of rotation. It seemed that it was no different from the real situation. Under normal circumstances, this was where they used the space-time remodeling instrument to control the entire Kingdom of Eternity. Here, they could use the space-time modifier. It could sense all the star fields of the Kingdom of Eternity and control the energy distributed on many planets by the space-time remodeling instrument. For example, back then, they had used this place to completely destroy the planetary fortress that Luo Fan had landed on, absorbing all the marks of life within the planetary fortress into the crystal sphere. After Luo Fan's doppelganger stayed in the space-time modifier, he said to the others, I want to use my independent control of the space-time modifier. Jing Lianglu, didn't you say that you were going to wait until the world couldn't hold on anymore before using this authority to modify the world? Why do you have to use it now? Could it be that your world can't hold on any longer? Lu Linlang asked in surprise. As long as there were people, there would be a distinction between public and private. The country of eternity was no exception, and the capital planet was no exception either. However, compared to other places, the country of eternity had almost absolute rules regarding the separation of public and private interests. For example, those who had the authority to control the space-time remodeling instrument. Anyone, even a sage, would certainly have the idea of using the space-time remodeling instrument for their own personal matters. That was to say, anyone would have the idea of using the public tool for private purposes. Under such circumstances, if no rules were made, it would eventually cause more and more chaos, and eventually, the order of the entire country of eternity might even disappear. Therefore, in order to prevent such a situation from happening, the country of eternity made a rule. According to the level, those who were above the counselors could use the space-time remodeling instrument for their own personal matters. Of course, it was according to the level. Beings of different levels could use the space-time remodeling instrument for their own personal matters. Normally, the number of times a counselor could use the space-time remodeling instrument for their own personal matters was 3 times. No matter how long they could live and how many years of life they could have, they could only use it 3 times for their own personal matters. As for the 36 chairmen above them, they could increase this number to 6. Similarly, no matter how long they lived, they could only use it 6 times. Such authority was obviously extremely precious, and it was the only goal for almost everyone to become a counselor or even a chairman. As the residents of the capital planet of the country of eternity, their lives were actually connected to the world they were born with. Without the world, their lifespan would not be much different from those outside the capital planet. At most, they could only live for 3,000 years, becoming a lowly life that they despised. Therefore, the importance of the world to them could be imagined. However, as a world that could be mass-produced, there was a limit to how long the world could exist. Generally speaking, a world would take about 30,000 years to grow from a seed until it finally collapsed and died. This was also the reason why the lifespan of the residents of the capital planet was limited to 30,000 years. The reason why the authority to use the space-time remodeling instrument was so precious was because it could modify a dying world, allowing the world to return to its seed state and start to grow again. In other words, the authority to use the space-time remodeling instrument once was equivalent to 30,000 years of life. The preciousness of this was imaginable. Even a counselor or chairman. This kind of usage authority would definitely be extremely precious, and it would not be easily wasted. As for why it could only be used 3 times instead of going on for a long time, they regarded this restoration as a kind of benefit. The reason was also very simple. That was because the consumption of the space-time remodeling instrument to turn a dying world back into a seed would increase sharply as the number of times increased. The consumption of the first restoration was only average, only 10 times more than the consumption of creating a world seed. As for the second restoration, the consumption would increase by 10 times on the basis of the first restoration. The third restoration would increase by 10 times on the basis of the second one. If there was no limit, then the space-time remodeling instrument would not even take a few million years to drain the entire country of eternity. It was also because of this terrifying consumption that the chairman, who was the most powerful person in the entire country of eternity, he only had the authority to use it 6 times. It was precisely because the authority to use the space-time remodeling instrument was so precious that Luo Fan used Jing Liang Lu's mouth to say that he wanted to use this authority at this time, which surprised his confidant so much. There's no problem. It's just that there's someone I know who needs this kind of modification. Luo Fan had already stated everything in a flash. It was not against the rules to use the authority to use the space-time remodeling instrument on others. It was just that no one would do this under normal circumstances. Hearing Jing Liang Lu's words, more than a dozen men and women present looked at Jing Liang Lu with a very strange expression. That look, it was as if they were looking at an idiot. Even Lu Linlang was looking at him as if she didn't know him. "Are you really going to do this?" Lu Linlang asked. Of course. Luo Fan naturally knew a little about them, but he didn't care. He just smiled and said, "The longer one lived, the more they were afraid of death." The residents of the capital planet could live for 30,000 years, which was already considered extremely long for mortals. Under such circumstances, it was not hard to imagine how afraid they were of death. In this way, this kind of opportunity to extend their lifespan, even in the deepest part of their dreams, they wouldn't make the choice to waste it on others. Even if they were to waste it on their parents, relatives, children, or spouses, they wouldn't make the choice. Seeing that Jing Liang Lu actually made such a choice, they suddenly felt that they and Jing Liang Lu were no longer the same people. An inexplicable estrangement appeared between them. This kind of estrangement made Lu Linlang say nothing more. She directly used the power of the space-time remodeling instrument to teleport out with the others. Together with the others, they teleported out and appeared on the hemispherical platform. After they appeared, the platform changed naturally, and a passage appeared. It was like a door that could lead to any place on the capital planet. "You're on your own," Lu Linlang said to the dial without a scale, then stepped into the passage and disappeared without a trace. After she left, the others also left one after another. However, before they left, they would subconsciously look back at the dial with an inexplicable light in their eyes, as if they had encountered a monster that they couldn't understand. Looking at them, they obviously think of you as a monster. Luo Fan smiled faintly at the void. "Who the hell are you? Why do you have control over my body?" In Jing Liang Lu's consciousness, a figure that looked like Jing Liang Lu was shouting crazily. This was actually Jing Liang Lu's self-consciousness. Although Luo Fan had turned Jing Liang Lu into his clone, he wasn't interested in Jing Liang Lu's self-consciousness. Anyway, Jing Liang Lu couldn't cause him any trouble, so he didn't bother to destroy it. He directly threw it into his consciousness and let it do whatever it wanted. "It doesn't matter who I am." Luo Fan smiled and said, "I'm just borrowing your body now. After using it, I will naturally return it to you." "Using it? You've wasted 30,000 years of my life. This is equivalent to killing me once. Who will compensate for my loss?" Jing Liang Lu shouted. 30,000 years of life. Just take it as the loss of your excessive curiosity. Who asked you to be so curious that you actually cast your gaze directly on me? If you had waited a little longer and let others cast their gaze on you first, the ones who would be controlled now would be others. Luo Fan chuckled. He naturally knew that Jing Liang Lu's words were obviously because he found out that Luo Fan could still communicate with him. He wanted Luo Fan to give him some benefits to make up for the loss of 30,000 years of life. However, what Jing Liang Lu plan was up to him. Luo Fan wasn't in the mood to go according to his plan. After he finished speaking, Luo Fan casually sealed the space of consciousness, so that Jing Liang Lu's eye could not see anything outside, and his voice could no longer penetrate the outside world. After doing this, Luo Fan directly began to control the space-time remodeling instrument and completely shut down all the various alarms and defenses inside. As the alarms and defenses were shut down, he faintly felt that his whole body was relaxed. There was a feeling that his whole body was completely relaxed. Previously, although he didn't feel any defensive existence of his space-time remodeling instrument, he faintly felt some kind of inexplicable danger. It was also the existence of this sense of danger that made him dare not to casually spread his perception around. He could only suppress himself. He used his own eyes to observe this space-time remodeling instrument. Although his eyes could almost see through everything, and it was also useful for other technological creations, in the face of this space-time remodeling instrument, it was still not enough. Although he could roughly see the outline, size, and other conditions of the space-time remodeling instrument, there were more specific things such as the specific structure of this space-time remodeling instrument and the working principle of this space-time remodeling instrument. As for the creativity contained in the space-time remodeling instrument and many other deeper things, he didn't get anything. It was just like scratching an itch through a boot. At this moment, after he completely shut down the alarms and defenses inside the space-time remodeling instrument through Jing Liang Lu's authority, the sense of danger instantly disappeared. That kind of relief naturally appeared. He felt this kind of inexplicable relief. Luo Fan smiled slightly. He controlled the power of the space-time remodeling instrument to directly break through space-time and gently pulled his body in Eden into this space-time remodeling instrument. Under normal circumstances, such a situation was impossible. The significance of the space-time remodeling instrument to the entire country of eternity had reached an indescribable height. If one wanted to touch the space-time remodeling instrument, even if one were to touch it outside, it would require countless inspections, discussions, and votes before it could be done, not to mention entering the space-time remodeling instrument. However, the situation at this moment was different from normal. At this moment, the alarms and defenses inside the space-time remodeling instrument had been completely shut down. In other words, the space-time remodeling instrument wouldn't be able to detect Luo Fan's appearance here at all. To the space-time remodeling instrument, Luo Fan's current body didn't exist at all. Inside the space-time remodeling instrument, there was still only Jing Liang Lu. I'm finally in. Arriving inside the space-time remodeling instrument, Luo Fan couldn't help but let out a long breath, an inexplicable smile appearing on his face. The process of entering the space-time remodeling instrument this time, from when Luo Fan had the idea to now, took a full month. Such a span of time might be very fast for mortals, but for Luo Fan, he felt rather aggrieved that he had to take such a big detour and waste such a long time for a technological creation. With a slight thought, his perception rushed out without hesitation and instantly swept through everything inside the space-time remodeling instrument. The space-time remodeling instrument's main body was as big as the central star of the capital galaxy, a huge star that was many times bigger than ordinary stars. And in such a huge space, the only empty space that could accommodate living beings was the area where Jing Liang Lu and the others originally stood, which was only a few dozen feet in radius. The other spots were densely packed with all kinds of parts made of all kinds of strange materials. The construction of these parts was so exquisite that it was hard to describe. Each part had a strange connection with all the other parts inside the space-time remodeling instrument. Each part was an indispensable part of the entire space-time remodeling instrument. If there was a problem with each part, it could affect the operation of the entire space-time remodeling instrument. How amazing was Luo Fan's perception! In an instant, all the parts inside the space-time remodeling instrument, all the structures, and even the materials of all the parts were instantly sensed clearly by him, and he directly reconstructed a huge space-time remodeling instrument in his mind. It's so complicated. When the entire space-time remodeling instrument was constructed, Luo Fan couldn't help but groan. For all the technological creations that Luo Fan had come into contact with in the past, including the world seeds and worlds of this capital planet, he had instantly understood their operating principles after knowing their structure. However, for this space-time remodeling instrument, he found that even if he completely knew its structure and could completely construct it in his mind, he still didn't understand its operating principles. There were many things that he didn't understand at all. How incredible was this? Chapter 1143. However, at this very moment, in front of this space-time reformer, after having absolute confidence that he could replicate it completely, he actually found that there were so many things that he could vaguely see in the operation of this space-time reformer. He was even confused by the operation rules of some of the parts. He even felt a little like an ordinary person watching a magic treasure being refined by a cultivator. For Luo Fan, this kind of feeling was unbearable, that kind of discomfort could be imagined. For a moment, Luo Fan almost devoted all his attention to the infinite number of parts in front of him. He deduced the function of each part bit by bit and worked hard to build the entire space-time reformer from scratch. The complexity of this process was quite astonishing. If it were not for Luo Fan's mental fortitude, he would not have been able to support it all. This part directly transforms a trace of electricity into a kind of power similar to space through complex and complicated changes. This power is then poured into another part, and through conversion, is turned back into electricity. Luo Fan carefully analyzed the function of these parts. Occasionally, he would use the function of the space-time reformer itself to search for some useful scientific and technological principles on this capital planet, so that he could understand this function more easily. As he carried on this process, Luo Fan felt that his understanding of scientific and technological civilization was constantly growing. This space-time reformer itself had the magical effect of transforming time and space. No matter how long Luo Fan spent inside, it would only be a few minutes in the eyes of the outside. Therefore, even though Luo Fan used such slow and complicated movements inside the space-time reformer to understand the working principle of this space-time reformer, but it did not affect Jing Liang Lu's understanding of the space-time reformer space-time and time. No matter how long it took, when he left this place and appeared outside, the time that had passed would be the same for the people outside. Unfortunately, this might be the case for outsiders, but not for Jing Liang Lu. The time inside the space-time reformer still moved forward in sequence. Luo Fan had experienced a long time here. Jing Liang Lu had also experienced a long time here. Whether it was a day or two, a year or two, or thousands of years, it was all the same. In other words, as long as Luo Fan stayed a little longer than 30,000 years, Jing Liang Lu's lifespan would be completely exhausted. Of course, this was meaningless to Luo Fan. At this moment, Luo Fan was fully focused on the principles of the space-time modifier. As he continued to integrate the technology of the Country of Eternity, he gradually gained a deeper understanding of the principles of the space-time remodeler. The space-time remodeling instrument used a method different from that of cultivators. Through the conversion of various types of energy, it superimposed ordinary energy countless times and raised it countless times. In the end, it would reach the level of transcending time and space, and then easily use this energy to modify time and space at will. It was precisely because of this method of utilizing the Great Tao and laws that this transformation was completely unrestrained. Therefore, it was inconceivable for him to be able to do so many things so easily. It was something that even cultivators would find difficult to accomplish. It could threaten Luo Fan, who was already a profound Tao master, by relying on an ordinary body. Such a fine structure. The more Luo Fan felt, the more he was amazed by such a wonderful idea and creativity. After entering this trial, my gains may be greater than when I entered the path of transcendence. Occasionally, such a thought would appear in Luo Fan's mind. The Country of Eternity was just a medium-sized country in this universe. The most advanced technological creation of a medium-sized country was only equivalent to a standard-level creation in a high-level country. Above the high-level countries, there were superpowers. That was the most advanced technological creation of a high-level country. But to a superpower, it was equivalent to a standardized creation. From this, it could be seen what level the space-time remodeling instrument was in this universe. Even so, the space-time remodeling instrument was able to pose such a threat to Luo Fan and allow Luo Fan to gain so much from it. One could imagine how much the entire universe could bring to Luo Fan. From the time Luo Fan stepped into the space-time remodeling instrument to the time when he finally fully understood its working principle, it took him thousands of years. Such a period of time was like a blink of an eye for Luo Fan, but for Jing Liang Lu, who was locked in his consciousness space, it was like a fraction of his life. Moreover, because he was locked in a consciousness space, he felt that the time was much longer than normal, which naturally made it more difficult for him. After thousands of years, Jing Liang Lu's mind had almost collapsed. His whole body had become dull and empty almost like a walking corpse. Naturally, Luo Fan did not care about Jing Lianglu's changes at all. After thousands of years of research on the space-time remodeling instrument, he had a great understanding. Although his cultivation realm did not improve much because of this understanding, he felt that his understanding of space-time had become more meticulous. He once again found many crude and wasteful ways of using space-time in the past. Standing there, Luo Fan moved his mind slightly. He raised his hand and gently grabbed, and the space-time in front of him directly compressed into a thin layer of crystal wall. The crystal wall was crystal clear, and it seemed to contain billions of colors in the world, as if it contained everything in the universe. Compared to the crystal wall created by the space-time remodeling instrument, this layer of crystal wall was thinner, tougher, purer in color, and more powerful. This was the crystal wall that Luo Fan had condensed by borrowing the working principle of the space-time remodeling instrument and combining it with the cultivation path he had mastered. Because of the addition of the various mysteries of laws, it had mysteries that the crystal wall created by the space-time remodeling instrument did not have, and its power was increased by thousands of times. If the crystal wall sphere that covered the planetary fortress was made of this crystal wall, back then, if Luo Fan wanted to break that crystal wall, he would have to spend at least 10,000 times more power. If I use three-dimensional talismans to replace those parts to form this space-time remodeling instrument, the effect should be able to reach my current level. If I were to refine it into a magical weapon, its power would increase by more than one level. It might even be able to threaten cultivators who have set foot on the fourth or fifth step. Luo Fan thought as he recalled his thousands of years of research. Thinking of this, Luo Fan smiled bitterly. It's a pity that there are too many parts. It's almost in the trillions. To refine a magic weapon made of such a large number of three-dimensional talismans into a magic weapon, the difficulty is equivalent to refining trillions of magic weapons into a magic weapon. The difficulty is just too great. It's almost like the loss outweighs the gain. Luo Fan sighed. His mind moved slightly. Luo Fan casually erased all of Jing Lianglu's memories of him, replenished his lifespan, and then let him go. With a light step, he was already out of the space-time remodeling instrument, and once again returned to the surface of the capital planet. After completely understanding the working principle of the space-time remodeling instrument, Luo Fan had long been wary of it. He had gained an incomparably deep understanding of its sensory detection methods. It was really very easy to hide this. Therefore, at this moment, he really operated his magic power without any scruples. He stood casually on the surface of the planet, and his perception wantonly enveloped the entire capital planet. He was probing all the secrets of the capital planet. During this process, the space-time remodeling instrument did not react at all, as if Luo Fan did not exist at all. Even Jing Lianglu doesn't know why he attacked the cultivators. Let's see if the 36 chairmen know. Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. The reason he came to the Country of Eternity was because the Country of Eternity's universe obliteration cannon attacked him. As for discovering the space-time remodeling instrument, that was something he only discovered after coming to the Country of Eternity. However, he had previously probed Jing Lianglu's memories. There was no memory of why he attacked the cultivators. All he had was a lot of life experience over the past 10,000 years, as well as a lot of technological knowledge that he had learned over the past 10,000 years. How vast was Luo Fan's perception? In the blink of an eye, he had already locked onto the 36 chairmen of the Country of Eternity. With a slight thought, a force bypassed the space-time remodeling instrument and easily grabbed the 36 of them. With a gentle pull, the 36 chairmen had already traversed through the space-time and appeared directly in front of him. Among these 36 people, there were men and women, old and young, but each of their auras was much stronger and more noble than those counselors that Luo Fan had seen before. At a glance, one could tell that they were existences with unimaginable power. Who are you? How dare you disrespect us? Don't you know that you're courting death? An old man had just gotten a clear look at his surroundings and instinctively scolded. This person's strength was very ordinary. Not to mention cultivators, he was much weaker than ordinary warriors. However, when this old man scolded, it was as if the entire world had changed color. It was as if he had the constitution of heaven and earth and the great Tao of the universe as soon as he opened his mouth. The star system of the country of eternity was counted in hundreds of millions. Around each star, there were at least several habitable planets, which meant that the population of each habitable planet was counted in at least 1 billion. In this way, one could know how many trillions of people these 36 chairmen had decided on. This kind of terrifying power naturally appeared on them, forming a kind of transcendent charm and indescribable sense of authority. Under such transcendent charm and authority, ordinary people would only feel inferior when they saw them. They might even unknowingly change their original plans and listen to their commands. If this kind of scolding were to happen to ordinary people, they would instantly break down and become fish on the chopping block without any ability to resist. However, it was obvious that Luo Fan was not an ordinary person. He was a Tao master whose essence had reached the profound realm and was close to the peak immortal realm. To him, such curses were as laughable as ants clamoring to trip a divine dragon. He could not be bothered to waste his breath on this person. He raised his hand and covered them. In an instant, the memories of these 36 chairmen were like a movie directly flowing through his mind and will. These 36 chairmen were the 36 people with the highest authority in the entire country of eternity. They were the secrets that they knew. Of course, they were also the most well-hidden secrets in the entire country of eternity. After searching for it, Luo Fan instantly found the reason why the country of eternity attacked cultivators. I see. It's actually the highest resolution of the Cosmic Alliance. Moreover, it's a resolution that must be hidden from all citizens and only the highest leader of each country can know of. No wonder. But why is there such a resolution? Why must it be hidden from all citizens? Luo Fan answered a question, but more questions popped up. It was a pity that although these 36 people were the ones who knew the most secrets among the trillions of people in the country of eternity. However, the country of eternity was only a remote, medium-sized country in the entire universe. Even in the Cosmic Alliance, they only had the qualifications to attend the meeting and not to vote. Therefore, the secrets they knew were quite limited. He couldn't find the real answer at all. It's actually hidden so deeply. This makes me even more interested. Luo Fan frowned and pondered, all kinds of guesses flashing through his mind. Oh, there's actually such a guess. Suddenly, Luo Fan found a speculation in the memory of a certain chairman, but he didn't know if it was reliable or not. Carefully looking through this guess, Luo Fan's eyes flashed with a hint of understanding, but there was also a hint of doubt. The appearance of cultivators. It may lead to the destruction of all civilizations in the universe, or even the destruction of the entire universe. This was the kind of guess that wasn't just unreliable. The reason why Luo Fan showed such a complicated expression after learning of this speculation was that if this speculation was true, then the reason why this secret was hidden from everyone could be explained. If everyone knew that their civilization and their universe were so fragile, then it would be impossible for them to survive. That would only cause great chaos and affect the progress of the civilization in the entire universe. This was not difficult to understand. Just like on Earth, if the appearance of a certain person could cause the entire Earth to collapse, then all the countries would hide this fact. Or would they publicize this fact? And the reason why Luo Fan was puzzled was because if this guess was true, then why would this be the result? Why would the appearance of cultivators cause the destruction of this universe and the destruction of the universe? It can't be that passing this trial will destroy the entire universe, right? Luo Fan couldn't help but laugh. This possibility was almost impossible. After all, this universe still existed, and there were already dozens of disciples from the Snow Rain Court who had passed the trial. Shaking his head, Luo Fan casually waved his hand, and the 36 speakers completely lost all memory of Luo Fan, instantly returning to their original positions. After doing this, Luo Fan couldn't be bothered to stay here any longer. With a step, he directly left the capital planet. Perhaps if I know the reason why they want to kill cultivators, I will be able to understand many truths about this universe and then know how to pass this trial. With this thought in mind, Luo Fan directly headed out of the Country of Eternity. The Country of Eternity was a remote, medium-sized country. Around this country, there were several other medium-sized countries. However, their strength was similar to the Country of Eternity. However, after all, they were not the Country of Eternity, so although their highest level of technological creation was on the same level as the space-time remodeling instrument, it was not the space-time remodeling instrument, but a variety of different but equally powerful creations. Through the space-time remodeling instrument, Luo Fan already knew the scale of this level of creation, so he was not as cautious with these medium-sized countries as he was with the Country of Eternity. Instead, he directly swept through these countries one after another, studying the highest technological creation of these several medium-sized countries without any scruples, studying the various principles that Luo Fan did not understand in the past. And from them, he tried his best to absorb what he needed, as well as all kinds of creativity that he had never obtained before. The law of causality converter, the second world, the 10th dimension, the God of creation lamp, and all kinds of incredible technological creations really broadened Luo Fan's horizons. After visiting a few medium-sized countries, he even felt that his cultivation realm had slightly loosened, as if he was beginning to step into a higher realm. This kind of change, for Luo Fan, was really an extremely unexpected change. It was also a change that made him overjoyed. At this time, Luo Fan was already a Tao Master in the profound realm, and it was not long ago that he became a Tao Master. Although he had already experienced many adventures to improve his cultivation realm to the peak of the profound realm of Tao Master, after all, he still needed a lot of time to accumulate again to get the opportunity to break through. And at this very moment, in this universe that was ruled by technology, after experiencing a few technological creations, he actually felt that his cultivation level had risen beyond his expectations. How unbelievable was this? And how fortunate was this? I actually obtained a revelation to improve my cultivation realm from it. It's really incredible that the technological civilization can actually have such an effect when it has developed to such a high level. At this time, Luo Fan was floating in the void of the universe, quietly comprehending the slight changes in his cultivation realm, and could not help but show an inexplicable expression on his face. At this moment, in front of him, there was a huge whirlpool-like galaxy. Chapter 1144. This country was a great country that was a level higher than the Country of Eternity. The standard weapon of this great country was the highest level of creations of the Country of Eternity. In other words, it was on the same level as the space-time remodeling instrument causality converter and other technological creations. Of course, although the standard and custom-made creations were of the same level, there was still a difference in power. Therefore, although the standard weapon was on the same level as the space-time remodeling instrument and other supreme creations of intermediate countries, it was still inferior in terms of power and usefulness. Luo Fan was just about to step into this country. All of a sudden, he felt an indescribable feeling in his heart. This feeling seemed to be an indescribable danger, an unimaginable opportunity, and an inexplicable peeping. How could this be? Luo Fan was slightly taken aback. At this moment, a huge hand suddenly appeared out of thin air and reached straight for Luo Fan. That gigantic hand covered the sky and covered the earth. It was at least 100,000 zhong in size, and it looked as if it was made of starlight. However, it was extremely solid, as if it was made of real flesh and blood. In fact, there were even countless palm patterns on it. As it gently reached out, it naturally gave off the feeling that the entire world was collapsing, as if the entire universe had become a part of this palm in an instant. An indescribable pressure was born out of thin air, directly acting on the area within a light-year radius around Luo Fan's body, causing everything within a light-year radius to seem to be completely fixed in place at this moment. Time, space, matter, energy. Rules, laws, and everything else seemed to have been locked down by an indescribable existence at this moment. Under such circumstances, the hand came around Luo Fan and was about to grab Luo Fan. Nice move. Could this be the god of the country of God? Faced with such a grab, this thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind. The power contained in the hand was earth-shattering. Just this grab alone was enough to easily subdue 90% of the peak quasi-sages. In fact, perhaps 10% to 20% of the cultivators on the first step would fall into the enemy's hand without any resistance. However, obviously, Luo Fan was not one of the peak quasi-sages. To him, peak quasi-sages would not be able to resist at all. In such a situation, facing such a large hand, Lin Fan felt a chill run down his spine. He only showed a faint smile on his face. He raised his foot and took a gentle step forward. The surrounding time, space, matter, energy, and even rules of law, all of them fluctuated slightly at this moment. After the ripples passed, his figure had already escaped from the pressure created by the palm. He easily arrived on top of the palm, raised his hand, and slapped it down. This slap was almost the same technique as that of the palm of Yishiwen. Similarly, it produced an indescribable pressure that enveloped the void several light years around the palm. Similarly, it completely froze time, space, matter, energy, and even the laws and regulations within the area. Similarly, it wanted to capture the palm like it was catching a mosquito. This was not a coincidence. Luo Fan had indeed used the same method to deal with this palm. Luo Fan's small hand grabbed it, but it didn't seem to be able to react in time and was caught by Luo Fan's small hand. At this moment, when Luo Fan's hand came into contact with the hand suddenly turned over and suddenly burst out with an unimaginably strong light. Between these rays of light, countless tiny space-times formed into a strange cage, directly trapping Luo Fan within it. This cage was completely invisible, but it was like a space-time maze. There were billions of layers of space-times densely built around Luo Fan. Even with his own perception, it took Luo Fan a long time to penetrate through the layers of space-time and see where the universe was. So it's such a method. Although it's rough, the effect is quite remarkable. Luo Fan could not help but exclaim inwardly when he sensed the changes in the invisible cage, directly creating layers of space-time from the outside in and forming billions of layers of space-time barriers to imprison people inside was not a delicate method. It could only be considered rough. However, it was obvious that the effect of this confinement was indeed amazing. For example, if Luo Fan wanted to break through the billions of layers of space-time barriers and return to the universe, he would need at least a few moments to do so. Ordinary cultivators, even those at the peak of the Sage-to-Be level, would need several years or even dozens of years to do so. Cultivators who had not reached the peak of the Sage-to-Be level might not even be able to do this. After using this rough method to imprison Luo Fan in the invisible cage, the huge hand turned and suddenly shrank to the size of a few meters and directly grabbed the invisible cage. Following that, a frightening chill was produced from the palm and poured into the cage. The intensity of this cold air had reached an unimaginable level. Absolute zero was like magma in front of this cold air. Due to this chill, the space-time within the layers of invisible cages was constantly frozen. All of the space-time was turned into a layer of ice that was stronger than the crystal wall that the space-time remodeling instrument had modified. It was filled with layers of space-time. After millions of layers of space-time, it still wanted to completely wrap Luo Fan in the layer of ice. How can it be so simple? Seeing this, Luo Fan smiled faintly. He raised his hand and patted it gently. In an instant, a three-dimensional talisman was sent out of his hand. After the three-dimensional talisman left his palm, it began to absorb the surrounding chill frantically and began to spread out frantically. The absolute extent of this spread even surpassed the barriers of space-time. As it spread, the three-dimensional talisman constantly devoured layers of space-time. Finally, in just a few breaths, the billions of layers of space-time were completely devoured by the three-dimensional talisman. The trillions of layers of space-time were completely devoured by the three-dimensional talisman. The three-dimensional talisman replaced the invisible cage and appeared in the palm. This three-dimensional talisman was not spherical. Instead, it was very strange, like the shape of a divine dragon. At this moment, because it had devoured so much chill, it had already become an existence like a crystal dragon. The chill emitted from its body was even stronger and more shocking than the chill emitted by the big hand. After it appeared, it roared at the sky and used both its hands and claws. Naturally, rolling clouds and mist formed around its body. Its entire body was almost completely covered between the clouds and mist. This crystal dragon's head and tail were nowhere to be seen. Its mysteriousness skyrocketed by more than 100 times. After the divine dragon appeared, the huge hand trembled slightly and suddenly shrank. It disappeared without a trace. After the three-dimensional talisman completely devoured the invisible cage, Luo Fan could already come and go at will. At this moment, he was already standing on the head of the crystal dragon with a single thought. Seeing that the palm was about to shrink into nothingness and disappear completely, Luo Fan smiled coldly. How can there be such a good thing in the world? You want to leave after launching a sneak attack on me? While speaking, he gently stepped on the divine dragon. In an instant, the crystal dragon let out an incomparably majestic dragon roar. Its figure directly broke through time and space and appeared in front of the big hand that was about to disappear. Then it opened its mouth and bit the big hand. Several claws directly grabbed the big hand and exerted force, pulling hard. Crack! The entire void shook violently. Moreover, it was not just the void here. The spiral galaxy on the opposite side, with unknown number of stars, also shook violently in an instant. It was as if the big hand, pulled by the crystal dragon, was pulling the entire galaxy. This kind of shaking became more and more intense as the big hand was pulled harder and harder. During this process, the big hand also struggled frantically. An incomparably powerful force erupted from the big hand and madly pounced on the crystal dragon. The crystal dragon also shook continuously, almost on the verge of collapse. Seeing this, Luo Fan slightly moved his mind. The three-dimensional talisman that formed the crystal dragon shook slightly, and in an instant, an indescribable suction force appeared out of thin air. This kind of suction force directly targeted the terrifying force that erupted from the big hand. The stronger the force emitted by the big hand, the stronger the power absorbed by the crystal dragon. In the end, it was used on the big hand, making the suction force emitted by the crystal dragon even more terrifying. Under such circumstances, the big hand shook, the void shook, and even the spiral galaxy shook more and more violently. At a certain moment, when the big hand finally gradually broke away from the state of disappearing and became completely real again, the terrifying vibration finally broke through a certain limit. In an instant, the vibration of the huge river system in front of them broke through its limit. At the edge of the river system, the bright spots of light were extinguished. Good heavens! When Luo Fan saw this, he couldn't help but have an indescribable feeling in his heart. What is this spiral-shaped light in front of me? That is a huge galaxy. In the Milky Way, the tiny specks of light that looked like stars from afar were actually huge stars. Around each star, there was one or several planets, and on each planet, there were at least 1 billion living beings. Under such circumstances, a large number of light spots at the edge of the huge galaxy suddenly extinguished. This meant that at this moment, a large number of stars were being destroyed. In other words, at this moment, hundreds of billions or even trillions of intelligent living beings were being destroyed at an unimaginable speed. Understanding this, even though Luo Fan's Taoist heart was firm and eternal, he couldn't help but have an indescribable feeling. Luo Fan only had this indescribable feeling towards the extinguishing of the stars and the death of such a large number of intelligent living beings. However, for the intelligence that was fighting him now, it was definitely not just that. In an instant, an unimaginable hatred and regret spread out from the palm, almost condensing into a monstrous sea of blood in front of Luo Fan, drowning Luo Fan. As the saying went, being condemned by 1,000 people would end without a cause. This wave of hatred and remorse was more than equivalent to being condemned by 1,000 people. It could not even be compared to the finger of 1,000,000,000,000 people. If he was facing an ordinary cultivator, he would definitely be dragged into the abyss by such a monstrous sea of blood. However, to Luo Fan, such a monstrous sea of blood that was almost formed could not even invade his body. It could only linger outside his body and could not even break through the three-dimensional talisman defense layer around his body, let alone cause any damage to Luo Fan. At this moment, the intelligence that was fighting with Luo Fan, or rather, wanted to escape after launching a sneak attack on Luo Fan, finally made a choice. In an instant, the power that was retracting loosened. The divine dragon under Luo Fan's feet easily snatched the palm and swallowed it into its stomach in a few bites, completely turning it into a part of the three-dimensional talisman. This was because the intelligence could no longer bear the loss of fighting with the crystal divine dragon for the palm. It could no longer watch the population of trillions continue to die. In the end, it could only choose to give up on the palm and the terrifying power it contained. When the crystal divine dragon swallowed the palm, Luo Fan instantly obtained all the secrets of the palm from the three-dimensional talisman. To actually use the will of a planet to create such a creation. What a creative idea. Luo Fan sighed. This palm was a part of the most advanced technology of the kingdom of God. And it was the most advanced technology of all, not the others. It was a god called the Heavenly God. This was the most important thing for a god. Not the body, but the intelligence known as the consciousness of the Heavenly God. This kind of intelligence was not created out of thin air. Instead, it was the product of the kingdom of God, combining the wills of every planet in the kingdom of God. The will of a planet was an abstract, formless existence. To a planet, it was the product of the will of every living being born on the planet since ancient times. It was so vast that it could change the sky, change time and space, and even reverse cause and effect. Furthermore, the longer the history of the planet, the more powerful the will would be, and the more terrifying it would be. Every living being had a soul. If it was a world with reincarnation, these souls would enter the cycle of reincarnation after the death of the living being. After going through all sorts of procedures, they would be reincarnated and return to the world. But in a world without reincarnation, these souls would naturally dissipate after the death of the living being and return to the planet itself. As for the remaining will, it would slowly fuse together and finally fuse into a great will that could change everything on the planet. That was the will of the planet. This kind of will was usually formless and incorporeal, without any thoughts or feelings. Only when the planet itself was in danger of being destroyed would this will awaken and begin to change the sky, distort time and space, reverse cause and effect, and pull the planet back on track, eliminating the danger of the planet. Of course, the power of the will of a planet with different life histories would be different. Generally, to be able to distort time and space and reverse cause and effect, the will of a planet would need at least tens of billions of years of history to be able to do that. For a planet with only a few million years of history, it was already very impressive for the will of the planet to be able to change the sky, but to distort time and space and reverse cause and effect, it was impossible to even think about it. To a star, the will of a planet was something that was naturally born. From the day the star was born, it continuously emitted light and heat, and naturally absorbed information from the void of the universe. This kind of will of a planet was much more vast and majestic than the will of a planet. However, it had a huge weakness, and that was because the will of a planet was not formed from the will of a living being, so it could not awaken. Even if the star was about to be destroyed, it would still be in a deep sleep without any thoughts or feelings. The highest technological creation of the nation of God was the condensation of the will of all the planets in the entire galaxy and all the stars, and then modified it to create a supreme existence known as the God. It was also because of this that the palm that Luo Fan saw before looked like it was condensed from starlight. As expected of a high-level country, Luo Fan raised his hand to condense the image of the palm in front of him, and his mind flashed with such a praise. In the entire galaxy of the nation of God, every planet had a history of more than 10 billion years. Some of the planets had a terrifying history of more than 100 billion years. The will of a planet like this had the terrifying power to distort time and space and reverse cause and effect. Such a planet's will was actually comparable to the highest creation of the country of eternity, the space-time remodeler. There were hundreds of billions or even trillions of stars in the galaxy, and the number of planets like this was several times more than this. Under such circumstances, it was easy to imagine how much stronger this creation that was formed from the will of all the stars and planets was compared to the space-time remodeler. With this kind of power, even I would have to retreat if I were to use it without hesitation. However, it's a pity that although the advantage is so obvious, the disadvantage is also very clear. It's quite easy to subdue it. Such thoughts flashed in Luo Fan's mind, and a faint smile appeared on his face. The advantage of the God was that the power of the combined will of all the planets was unimaginably terrifying, and could even easily defeat a cultivator who had stepped onto the steps. Chapter 1145. Because of this restriction, it was impossible for the heavenly God's power to burst out without restraint. Just like before, because they had to struggle against the crystal divine dragons, pulling force, tens of thousands of galaxies at the edge of the galaxy had directly collapsed and been destroyed. Under such circumstances, as long as Luo Fan didn't push too hard, the heavenly God's intelligence wouldn't be able to fight him without restraint. In this way, no matter how strong the heavenly God was, it was as good as nothing. Naturally, it wouldn't be able to pose a threat to Luo Fan. With a plan in mind, Luo Fan lightly patted the giant hand in front of him. The giant hand trembled slightly and disappeared without a trace. After doing this, he lightly stepped on the crystal dragon under his feet. The crystal dragon that had gained sentience due to its strength exceeding the limit understood what he meant. With a slight tremble, it directly tore apart space-time and dived into it, directly disappearing into the void. When it reappeared, the crystal dragon had already traversed countless light years and directly dived into the galaxy. Moreover, it directly appeared in the center of the galaxy, which was the center of the entire spiral of light. This was where the heavenly God was located. In other words, it was the place where the heavenly gods were gathered. At this location, the concentration of this planet's will had already reached an unimaginable level. It was able to recreate heaven and earth, recreate space-time, and form another world, another universe. A universe that didn't need to care about how the outside universe changed. It completely belonged to the heavenly God's universe. Such a world. Of course, this universe didn't need to care about what the outside universe looked like. Instead, it was completely built according to the heavenly God's needs. Therefore, this was a world with a round sky and square earth. Here, the earth was like the earth before the sky, and earth shattered. It was boundless and flat. Around this world, there were even several stars orbiting this world, bringing the sun, moon, and stars to this world. Such a large area. It was almost bigger than the area of a dozen galaxies combined. This was normal. After all, this was a galaxy. The center of such a huge galaxy with hundreds of billions or even trillions of stars needed to have a strong gravitational force. Normally, there should be a gigantic black hole at the center of the galaxy. Only then could it provide such a terrifying gravitational force and bind so many galaxies around it, allowing the galaxy to stabilize. At this very moment, because of the will of the planet, the black hole that should have existed was replaced by such a world. Such a world was a normal world. If it was the size of a black hole, it would naturally not be able to provide the terrifying gravitational pull of a black hole. Therefore, in order to maintain the stability of this galaxy. The area of this world could only be expanded as much as possible. It was normal for it to be the size of a dozen star systems. This was something that the river system could withstand. In Luo Fan's eyes, there was nothing strange about such an orbicular world. However, Luo Fan was surprised that it existed in this world. Because under this world, or rather, relatively speaking, under this world, there was not a void. Instead, there was a giant. It was an incomparably huge giant that was almost as big as this entire world. In fact, it was even vaguely larger than this huge world. This giant was curled up like it was sleeping in its mother's womb. It laid quietly under this world. There was an incomparably terrifying and obscure energy radiating from his body. It continuously poured into the incomparably huge world above, as if it was supporting the world, but also as if it was providing the world with everything it needed to consume. In an instant, Luo Fan knew that this giant must be the product formed by the will of the entire galaxy. The origin of the name of the country of God. After looking at the right palm of the god, Luo Fan finally confirmed his guess. The area below the god's right wrist was a little dim, as if a large portion of the starlight that formed the palm had been lost. At this moment, the other parts of the giant's body were constantly pouring starlight into the right palm, causing the light on the palm to slowly recover at an undetectable rate. You came with ill intentions. At this moment, the god seemed to have sensed Luo Fan's arrival. He suddenly stretched his body and opened his mouth, saying this. This voice directly permeated through time and space, through all matter, energy, and even the laws of law. It directly entered Luo Fan's ears, allowing Luo Fan to hear it in an instant. It depends on how you look at it. Luo Fan was not surprised by this, and just said indifferently, this god was the collection of the will of the galaxy. This galaxy could actually be considered his body. In other words, Luo Fan was currently inside his body. Under such circumstances, if he wanted to transfer his body anywhere, why would he need a medium? However, you shouldn't have come here. Two huge vortexes flashed in the god's eyes. Then, he reached out with his left hand towards Luo Fan. This time, his speed and power were tens of thousands of times stronger than when he was outside the galaxy. In an instant, Luo Fan could even faintly see a world with a round sky and a square earth rapidly being born and destroyed in front of this palm. What a powerful planet's will. When Luo Fan saw this, he could not help but sigh in admiration. The worlds that were constantly being born and destroyed in the palm of this extended left hand were not illusory worlds, but real worlds. They were contained within the planet's will. The ideals of all living beings affected time and space, naturally causing time and space to change, naturally forming the worlds. However, because the desires of all living beings changed rapidly, and these worlds were strange in appearance, it was impossible for them to be unified. It was impossible to unify them, so it was impossible for them to exist for long. Instead, they could only exist in the palm of this hand for an insignificant moment before they were completely destroyed and disappeared. If one day the desires of all living beings could be unified and the ideals of all living beings could be completely the same, then this world would be able to completely stabilize. In the end, it would live and die together with the desires of all living beings. As long as all living beings were not destroyed, it would never be destroyed. However, in this way, he had already embarked on the path of believing in God. That would require building a unified belief for all living beings, just like Buddhism and other religions, to unify the worldview of all living beings, to make all living beings believe in the existence of such an ideal, great country. This was obviously no longer within the scope of a technological civilization, but the scope of a cultivation civilization. And obviously, for a technological civilization like the country of God, this was obviously impossible. Once they believed in others, then their living beings, their population, would naturally lose their sense of self, and their pursuit of technological civilization would naturally decrease. This would cause the development of technological civilization to rapidly slow down. In the end, the result would be the complete destruction of the entire country of God. Taking such a risk just to create a world was obviously not a choice that the living beings of the country of God would make. After all, with the technological level of the country of God, creating a world was not a difficult task for them. It was not a difficult task for them at all. The colossal world that occupied the center of the galaxy and had a dozen planetary systems was proof of that. Countless thoughts flashed through Luo Fan's mind, but the movements of his hands did not slow down in the slightest. He raised his foot and lightly stepped on the crystal dragon, causing it to shake violently and let out an earth-shattering roar towards the sky. Following that, its body expanded crazily, and in a short while, it had already grown to the size of the god. The crystal divine dragon's form had also changed slightly from its original tiny appearance to its current size. Its entire body seemed to have become a little more transparent and illusory. However, that was all it could do. After becoming this huge, the crystal dragon raised one of its claws and swung towards the god's left hand. This swing might not be as strong as the god slap in terms of strength, but it contained a completely different essence. With this wave, the laws of the universe, time, space, and even the great chaos of the universe were instantly activated. Endless power was added to this wave, making it seem as if the power of the entire universe had gathered together to meet the heavenly god's palm strike. Ka-ka-ka-ka. Shio-shio-shio. An earth-shattering sound that could not be described with words rang out the moment the two sides collided. Although the crystal dragon's claw contained the mysteries of cultivation, as if it had gathered all the power of the universe, the god went in a different direction. The absolute power was also extremely shocking, and the moment the two sides collided, the crystal dragon's claw could not break through the attack of the god's palm. All the power was lost at the moment of contact. At the same time, the god's slap was also unable to break through the defense of the claw. All the power was completely canceled out by the claw that contained the mysteries of cultivation. The moment the two completely canceled out, the heaven and earth shook violently. The entire galaxy was like a small tree that was shaking violently at this moment. Almost every star in the huge world that existed in the center started shaking violently. The sound that was produced even broke through the limit and condensed into all sorts of unbelievable forms in the void of the universe. These forms were not completely fixed, but they were changing at an unimaginable speed, transforming into various forms of destruction that all living beings in this world had imagined. They were like demons, ghosts, madness, and all sorts of abstract and indescribable forms. The crystal dragon was originally just a three-dimensional talisman that Luo Fan had casually set up. It had only grown to this extent because it had absorbed the power of the god's palm. After all, it was still inferior to the god due to its intrinsic limitations. At this moment, its entire body emitted a violent explosion, and the image of the crystal dragon was greatly damaged. It seemed to have completely collapsed and almost turned into a ball of jelly. After a long while, the crystal divine dragon condensed back into the form of the divine dragon. That move just now. How many galaxies have been completely destroyed? Luo Fan did not care about the damage to the crystal dragon. After all, it was just a three-dimensional talisman that he had casually condensed. However, he was rather curious about the god's loss. The god hovered in mid-air, an expression of anger and regret on his face. The god suppressed his emotions and said coldly, "In the past, I didn't know why those superpowers wanted to exterminate all cultivators, but now I kind of understand." What do you understand? Apart from wanting to see more advanced technology and learn from its creativity, Luo Fan had also come here to find out why this universe's attitude toward cultivators was like this. Now that he heard the god say this, he could not help but become curious. "You are the cancer of the universe," the god said. "To grow to this level, you would need at least the resources of more than 10 superpowers. At the very least, it would consume the resources of more than 10 great countries. But in the end, these resources would be wasted just like that, completely impossible to return to the cosmos. If there were a few more cultivators like you, wouldn't the cosmos be sucked dry by you all? This heavenly deity said. Cancer. When Luo Fan heard this, he could not help but find it funny. Another fool who speculates about the cultivation civilization from the perspective of a technological civilization. The god was the condensation of the will of all the planets in this galaxy. After going through some kind of exquisite and indescribable modification, its intelligence had long since reached an unimaginable level. It had its own ideas, its own thoughts, and was no longer a simple machine. When he heard Luo Fan's words, he was like the flame giant back then. He frowned, unwilling to believe it. Aren't you Cancer? Our technological civilization also uses energy on a large scale, even changing the sky, reversing cause and effect, and reversing space-time. However, all of our energy comes from the universe. In the end, after going through a cycle, it still returns to the universe. Even if it's my own energy, it's also incorporated into the universe's cycle system. So there's no way that there's no return. All energy that enters your body is like entering a black hole. No, a black hole can even emit energy in a certain way. You people are even worse than a black hole. You people are completely using all that energy to enhance your own life essence. You don't give any of it back to the universe at all. If this isn't a Cancer of the universe, then what is? The heavenly god said. That's right, the god said. The voice was vast and majestic, filled with boundless righteousness. In fact, Luo Fan even felt as if the entire universe was questioning him. In fact, the entire Milky Way trembled slightly under this voice. Faintly, the many-star systems showed signs of recovering from the damage they had sustained. As mentioned before, the entire galaxy was actually equivalent to the god's body. Under such circumstances, the change in the heavenly god's mentality would naturally be reflected in the changes in the river system. At this moment, the god's righteousness was awe-inspiring, as if it was the righteousness of the entire universe's will. This was naturally reflected in its body, allowing it to gain some benefits. In the face of such an awe-inspiring righteous question, Luo Fan merely shook his head and smiled faintly. The gap between the two civilizations is really unbelievably huge. He sighed softly. With that, he did not bother to say anything else and casually flicked the void. In an instant, a speck of light appeared in front of him out of nowhere. Then, like a balloon being blown up, the light began to expand rapidly. In the blink of an eye, it had expanded to the size of a planet. After reaching the size of a planet, the space-time within the light suddenly trembled and instantly became extremely chaotic. In the end, it directly turned into a gray and hazy existence. After that, it would only be a moment for the outside world. However, for the space-time within that had already become chaotic, an unknown amount of time had passed. The gray and hazy area instantly separated. The clear and turbid separated, and a world began to evolve out of thin air. This world had a round sky and a square earth. Although its area was not very large, it was a complete world. This was a boundless world where space and time were stable. This was only secondary for the heavenly god. Although the way this boundless world appeared was beyond his imagination, the essence of this world could not compare to the huge world that he had created above his head. The stability of time and space in that world was much stronger than the boundless world that Luo Fan had created. What shocked the heavenly god was that this boundless world had a special characteristic that the world he had created did not have. This world could naturally generate energy, the kind of energy that cultivators called vitality. How is this possible? This is a violation of the law of conservation of energy. You must have stolen energy from somewhere else and poured it into this world. That must be it. The heavenly god roared. As he roared, the entire galaxy shook slightly. Even the world above his head began to shake violently, as if an earthquake had occurred. Luo Fan could even see countless living beings in that world dying instantly, because they could not withstand the terrifying will. The soul ring fused into that world. The law of conservation of energy was the foundation of technological civilization. Of course, the law of conservation of energy mentioned by the heavenly god was very different from the law of conservation of energy that Luo Fan knew before he traveled to the untainted world. The scope and breadth of the law were completely different concepts. Chapter 1146. The heavenly god felt like his worldview had been turned upside down. Even his body was showing signs of being unable to maintain its form. After a while, the heavenly god's body stabilized again. It was just that his expression was many times worse than before. The entire galaxy had also become somewhat broken. Because of this, who knew how many galaxies had been destroyed in the process? Luo Fan quietly watched the changes in the heavenly god without any change in his expression. After the heavenly god stabilized again, he smiled faintly and said, "Conservation of energy? This is only the foundation of a technological civilization. For cultivation civilization, as long as one reaches a certain level, energy can be created out of thin air." As he spoke, he did not wait for the heavenly god to react. He raised his hand, and the boundless world he had casually created suddenly trembled, producing an unimaginable suction force that directly acted on the heavenly god's body. After all, the heavenly god was a product formed from the will of all the planets in the galaxy. Sucking him into another world was equivalent to completely stripping away the will of all the planets in the galaxy. One could imagine how difficult it would be. If the heavenly god was unwilling, Luo Fan would not be able to do it unless he used the most powerful suction ability he had and expanded the boundless world billions of times. However, Luo Fan was confident that the heavenly god would not be unwilling to do so. After all, the existence of the boundless world itself had already subverted the foundation of cultivation civilization. Under such circumstances, how could the heavenly god not want to understand the truth of this world? How could he not be willing to enter and experience the truth of this world for himself? Sure enough, just as Luo Fan had thought, when the suction force of the world appeared, the heavenly god trembled slightly and will directly floated out of his body and entered the world. This was not the power of the heavenly god itself, but the magical effect of the suction force that Luo Fan used with the help of the boundless world. As the will was drawn into the world, the heavenly god's body seemed to become a dead object that quietly floated in the void of the universe. Faced with this, a faint smile appeared on Luo Fan's face. His perception directly seeped into the heavenly god's body. After losing the protection of the massive will of the planets, the heavenly god's body no longer had the ability to block Luo Fan's perception. In an instant, Luo Fan's perception directly penetrated the deepest part of the heavenly god's body. From the inside to the outside, he could clearly see the structure of the heavenly god without reservation. The heavenly god's body was not a machine. It was not even solid. Instead, it was made of illusory of stars. The heavenly god's body was like the heavenly god. It was like the cells of this god, and the planets around the star were like the mitochondria in these cells. As soon as he saw the illusory stars, Luo Fan of stars, the heavenly god's body, they were both real, and as soon as Luo Fan saw the shadows of these stars, he knew that they were both real and illusory. They existed in a very strange way. These shadows could be said to be illusions, but they could also be said to be the real bodies of the stars. What a creative idea, Luo Fan praised. Because of the existence of the illusory stars, the heavenly god could be said to be an independent entity, but at the same time, it could also be said to be the whole galaxy or the whole country of God. So that's how the country of God got its name. I was taking it for granted before. Thinking of this, Luo Fan's mind suddenly flashed with such a thought. He originally thought that the country of God was named this way because the heavenly God was the country of God, and the country of God was the heavenly God. But now he knew that the country of God was named this way because the heavenly God was the whole country of God, and the whole country was the heavenly God. With a thought, Luo Fan directly cut into the heavenly god's mind. In there was not a star, but a world. It was an incomparably huge world that was the size of over a dozen stellar systems. It had a round sky and a square earth. This world appeared in the heavenly god's head. Whether it was the shape or the size, it was like the heavenly god's brain. This world was not any other world. It was the world with a round sky and a square earth right above the heavenly god. It was also the center of the galaxy, the capital of the country of God. Luo Fan's perception cut into this world, and in an instant, it was like he had cut into the heavenly god's memories. Endless memories, or rather information, were pouring into his mind through his perception. The amount of information was huge. Even if it was Luo Fan, if he didn't hold anything back, he wouldn't be able to withstand it all. This was different from the information backlash when the era projection was destroyed. Even though the information backlash from the era projection was extremely large, it was only a considerable amount of information. It was merely the development of various real events. Although the amount of information was huge, and the pressure on Luo Fan's mind was also shocking, he could rely on his own cultivation to withstand it. However, at this moment, the information was different. The information that was crazily pouring into Luo Fan's mind was the memories of trillions of living beings. It was even the memories of all living beings that had appeared in the river system where the kingdom of God was located from ancient times to the present. If Luo Fan wanted to bear all of this, he could only rely on his own mind and his own memories to bear it. If he were to rely on his own cultivation, it would only result in the complete erasure of this information, or in other words, the complete erasure of these memories. Facing this terrifying information, Luo Fan made a prompt decision. In his mind, he directly constructed the huge whirlpool that connected to the demon realm that he had seen in the divine child's memory. The endless information was constantly sent into these vortexes, constantly purifying them. After the information left these vortexes, it would not be able to withstand the power of these vortexes. After the information left the whirlpool, almost all the impurities were completely eliminated, leaving behind only the most fundamental, purest, and deepest traces. If it was just the memories of one or two life forms, this kind of change would only result in the remnant consciousness. It would be impossible for Luo Fan to obtain the information he wanted. However, it was very obvious that the information that was pouring into Luo Fan's mind was not just the memories of one or two life forms. It was endless from the ancient times until now, who knows how many billions of years. It was the sum of the memories of countless life forms that had appeared in this country of God. The amount was too much. It was already enough to cause a shocking change. Therefore, after going through such a cleansing, the remnant traces of the will merged together and formed a single will. Or rather, it was a memory of a single person. It was none other than the memories of everything that the heavenly God had experienced since he was born. Although the memories of countless people were in the heavenly God's mind, the heavenly God was able to display a clear mind. Of course, it was impossible for him to treat these memories as his own. With the technology of the country of God, it was impossible for them to create such a chaotic monster. The heavenly God's intelligence was based on the endless memories, or rather, the essence of the endless consciousness, and was constructed according to that essence. This was obviously similar to the method that Luo Fan was using to purify the memories. Therefore, he was able to completely purify the heavenly God's memories. After purifying the memories, Luo Fan was quite satisfied. He carefully flipped through the memories. Based on the memories and understanding of the universe, he gradually understood the true nature of the universe. He also understood why the Universe Alliance had the highest resolution to destroy all cultivators. This was also one of the main reasons he came to the country of God. The reason why this was the highest resolution of the Universe Alliance was very simple. A long, long time ago in ancient times, this universe had been destroyed once. This kind of destruction was the destruction of all civilizations in the universe. It was the destruction of the universe returning to chaos and nothingness. After that destruction, because time no longer had any meaning, it could have been countless trillions of years, or it could have been at the moment of destruction, when the universe was born again. After that, it slowly developed, and finally developed into this boundless universe. And the many superpowers of this universe relied on their unimaginable technology to reflect back countless trillions of years ago, before the birth of the universe, and finally found the reason for the destruction of the previous universe. It wasn't because of the development of technology that caused the destruction of the entire universe. It was because of the battle between two cultivators. That's right, it wasn't some cosmic war. It wasn't the superpowers that triggered the destruction of the universe. It was a battle between two cultivators that caused the destruction of the universe. It caused the complete destruction of an unknown number of trillions of galaxies in the universe of the previous era, as well as the complete destruction of a number of intelligent life forms that exceeded the limits of what could be described with numbers. After finding out about this, it was natural for the Universe Alliance to carry out such a policy against the cultivators. As for why they wanted to hide the reason for the cultivators' annihilation, it was even less strange. If ordinary people knew that the cultivators could destroy the entire universe so easily, what kind of impact would that be? What kind of chaos would it cause in the end? Any living being with the slightest bit of intelligence wouldn't choose to do something like this. Luo Fan couldn't help but sigh when he saw all this from the god's memories. According to the current strength of this universe, the technology of the previous universe shouldn't be much weaker than it is now. Even a pinnacle sage-to-be would not be able to deal with a superpower. If they wanted to destroy the entire universe in a battle, they would need to be at least a cultivator who had reached the 5th or 6th step. I wonder who was the cultivator who destroyed the previous generation of this universe. Various thoughts flashed through his mind, and his eyes flashed with an inquisitive light. The two cultivators that destroyed the universe in a battle were obviously not cultivators from the Xuanyu Court. If the Xuanyu Court could do that, why would they need to seal this universe? This universe has the aura of the demon realm. Could it be that the two cultivators came from the demon realm? Luo Fan thought. A light flashed through his mind, and suddenly such a thought flashed through his mind. I've been neglecting my duties these days. Although this technological civilization has some exciting creativity, it's nothing compared to the aura of the demon realm. Luo Fan suddenly came back to his senses and couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Although the technological civilization in this universe had developed to an unimaginable level, and Luo Fan couldn't help but be tempted and curious, all these were insignificant compared to the demon realm with the existence of sages. These days, he had completely ignored the source of the aura of the demon realm and paid attention to these technological civilizations. It could be said that he was putting the cart before the horse and neglecting his duties. If he wanted to barge through the source of this trial, he would have to search for the source of the aura of the demon realm, which was even more mysterious. Obviously, searching for the source of the aura of the demon realm was more likely to succeed. Besides, even if the source of the aura of the demon realm had nothing to do with the way through this trial, then finding the source would also allow Luo Fan to see if there was a chance for him to find a location of the demon realm. If he could enter it, it wouldn't be impossible for him to pass this trial. It wasn't something unacceptable. After secretly reflecting on himself, Luo Fan calmed down and continued to search through the god's memories. Although Luo Fan's cultivation was beyond imagination, and his perception was also beyond the limit, he could easily know almost everything he wanted to know. However, after all, he had just entered this universe not long ago. In terms of understanding of this universe, he couldn't compare to the god who had existed in this universe for an unknown amount of time, controlled a huge force, and had connections with many superpowers in this universe. Under such circumstances, if Luo Fan wanted to find the source of the aura of the demon realm, it would be more useful to search through the god's memories. The aura of the demon realm was integrated into the entire universe and belonged to some abstract concept of this universe. This kind of existence wasn't something that science and technology could deal with. Thus, even if the god had the memories of all living beings in the kingdom of God, even if he had countless years of accumulation, even if he had connections with many superpowers, it was impossible to find the source of the aura from his memories. However, just because he couldn't find it directly didn't mean that he couldn't find clues. The aura of the demon realm was an extremely mysterious aura, and its existence would definitely cause the universe to change. This change would be stronger and more obvious the closer one was to the source of the aura. What was the most obvious characteristic of this universe? It wasn't the unimaginably powerful technology, but the fact that there were planets with life around every star. Life was the miracle of the universe. Normally, without the interference of any special power, such a miracle would not be so widespread. And the most obvious special interference in the universe was the aura of the demon realm. Luo Fan's clear mind immediately grasped this important point. He brought up the map of the universe that the heavenly god knew and marked out the distribution of life planets. Immediately, he obtained a rough distribution map. Locally, the distribution of habitable planets was irregular. If there were more habitable planets in one star system, there might be fewer habitable planets in the next one, and then there might be more habitable planets in the next one. It was as if the entire system was completely random. However, when the distribution of a large number of habitable planets was marked, a general pattern of change could be seen on the whole. It could be seen that the density of habitable planets was gradually increasing in one direction. So that's how it is. Luo Fan couldn't help but let out a sigh. The direction in which the density of the planets was increasing was obviously the direction in which the technology of the universe was advancing. This direction was also the direction that he had been going since he entered the universe, which was from Guotuan County to the country of eternity, and then from the country of eternity to the kingdom of God. And in front of the kingdom of God, there was a large number of countries that were also high-grade countries. After this large number of high-level countries, there were a few incomparably large superpowers. It was also these super countries that formed the center of the universe. The universe itself didn't have a center. Every star field in the universe was no different from any other star field in terms of absolute level. It could be said that they were the center of the universe and also the edge of the universe. However, as long as there were intelligent life forms, the universe would definitely need a center. Only with a center could many things be defined. And in this universe, the center of the universe was defined by the regions where the strongest countries were located. The distance between the center and Luo Fan's current location, which was also the location of the nation of God, was about trillions of galaxies. However, not all of these river systems were high-level countries. Almost all of them were made up of low-leveled and middle-leveled countries. Only a small number of galaxies could be called a high-grade country. Chapter 1147. After traversing through this galaxy for who knows how many trillions of years, there were dozens of superpowers. The distribution of these superpowers was roughly in the shape of a sphere, occupying the star fields with the densest number of habitable planets in the entire universe. Beyond the star fields where the superpowers were spread out, there were countless other star fields that only had high-level countries, but no superpowers. Based on this distribution, it was obvious that the most powerful region of the superpowers was the center of the universe. According to this view of the universe, whether it was the high-tier country of God or the mid-tier country of eternity, they could be said to be located in the remote regions of the universe. It was not wrong to call them wilderness. It seems that the source of the demon realm's aura is very likely in one of the star fields where the superpowers are located. Luo Fan thought, and a faint smile appeared on his face. He raised his head and looked at the void in front of him, his gaze seemingly penetrating through the distance of who knows how many billions of light years, and he saw the publicly recognized center of the universe. The demon realm's aura might not only affect the density of habitable planets, but also something deeper. Otherwise, the closer one is to that place, the stronger the countries would be. This thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. Of course, this thought was based on the possibility that the center of the demon realm's aura was in the star field where the superpowers were located. Just as Luo Fan was thinking about this, the heavenly god in front of Luo Fan suddenly trembled. An indescribable pulling force was produced from the heavenly god's body. It directly acted on the world that Luo Fan had casually opened up before. Along with this pulling force, a figure suddenly rushed out of the world. Like a phantom, it completely merged into the heavenly god's body. Luo Fan instantly knew that this heavenly god had finished investigating the world that he had opened up. At this moment, it directly touched his body and borrowed the power of his body to pull his will out and return it to his body. Sure enough, after this transformation, the heavenly god's eyes opened, and there was a shocking look in them. However, although there was a look in his eyes, there was an indescribable helplessness on the heavenly god's face. I didn't expect the world you created to be so different from the one we created. Even with the knowledge that I've accumulated over tens of billions of years, I can't fully understand how it can produce energy out of thin air. The heavenly god sighed. At this moment, he had no enmity towards Luo Fan. Even after he heard the reason why the Universe Alliance wanted to exterminate all cultivators, it was still the same. To him, the reason why the previous universe was destroyed was too far away. He was not of those superpowers, and he didn't have to worry about the responsibility of the Universe Alliance. Heavenly God, anything that could be beneficial to him was the best thing in the world. Luo Fan, who was in front of him, had the secret of being able to break through the conservation of energy. For him, this had an unimaginable attraction. It was enough to suppress the highest resolution of the Universe Alliance and the huge losses caused by the previous battle with Luo Fan. Luo Fan had already talked about this, so he wasn't surprised to hear this heavenly god say this. He smiled and said, "That's for sure. Your technological civilization is very creative with the use of energy, and many times you can think of things that we cultivators can't think of, and create things that even I am amazed by. But you guys have a big weakness." "What weakness?" The heavenly god's eyes lit up. He was shocked. "This weakness is your understanding of the world. It's all one-sided." Luo Fan smiled faintly. The heavenly god frowned. He really wanted to refute Luo Fan's words. But the truth was right in front of him. The world that Luo Fan casually created could break the conservation of energy and produce energy out of thin air. And the world that he spent countless years to create, or rather modify, didn't have this characteristic. He needed to constantly convert the free energy in the universe into it to maintain the stability of the world. This difference was enough to show that there was a problem with his method, and it was enough to show that there was a problem with his understanding of the world. I'm done. Let's stop here for today. If fate wills it, we'll talk again in the future. Just as the heavenly god was waiting for Luo Fan to reveal the truth, Luo Fan suddenly said something that spoiled the mood, causing the heavenly god to freeze in place. After Luo Fan finished his sentence, he turned around to leave. Seeing Luo Fan like this, the heavenly god didn't dare to delay any longer. He hurriedly said, "Wait, what's the matter?" Luo Fan asked faintly. As he asked this question, an indescribable aura seeped out, directly shaking the souls of all living beings. Even the heavenly god in front of him was no exception. The heavenly god's body was unimaginably huge. In comparison, Luo Fan's body seemed so small that it was negligible. But at this moment, Luo Fan seemed so huge that he directly suppressed the heavenly god in front of him, and even the huge crystal dragon under his feet. In a trance, the heavenly god felt as if his body and the person in front of him had been completely reversed. He became incredibly small, and the other party became incredibly huge. This small change instantly made the heavenly god dispel all of his originally irrational thoughts. He directly bowed to Luo Fan and said, "Immortal, please dispel my doubts." For a heavenly god who was the condensation of the will of all the planets in the galaxy, calling a living being an immortal sounded so strange and awkward no matter how one looked at it. But at this moment, this heavenly god spoke with incomparable sincerity, and every word really came from the bottom of his heart. One couldn't help but suppress this kind of incongruity, this kind of awkwardness. Why do I remember that we were originally enemies? Luo Fan said faintly with a smile. We're not enemies. After all, this heavenly god rarely did things like begging others, so his words were really dry and hard to listen to. Luo Fan looked at this heavenly god and thought for a moment. Forget it, since you want to know. There's no problem telling you. But I have a condition. The heavenly god said without hesitation, Immortal, feel free to ask. No matter what the condition is, I have no objections. It's not a difficult matter. I want all the information you know about technological creations, Luo Fan said faintly. To Luo Fan, the kingdom of God wasn't of much use to the heavenly god anymore. When he said that he was out of interest, he wasn't joking. He really didn't want to waste any more time with this heavenly god. He really wanted to leave. He wasn't putting on an act. Of course, this didn't mean that he would hide what the heavenly god wanted to know. He was determined to do so. After all, it was just a small matter to him. If the heavenly god didn't ask, he naturally couldn't be bothered to answer. But if the heavenly god wanted to know, he could explain it to him. It wasn't a big deal. Hearing Luo Fan's request, the heavenly god couldn't help but be stunned. It wasn't that the request was too difficult. It was the opposite. It was way too easy. The amount of information that the kingdom of God had on technology was unimaginable. But even if he gave it to Luo Fan, the kingdom of God wouldn't lose anything. Moreover, among all the information, the highest level was only the heavenly gods themselves. Compared to the immortal in front of him who could casually create a world that broke through the laws of energy conservation, the heavenly gods level was way too low. Under such circumstances, how could he not be shocked that Luo Fan actually made such a request? The heavenly god was only stunned for a moment before he reacted and said that it wasn't a problem. A small request was a good thing for him. If he thought that the request was too small and wanted the other party to change it, then the word stupid wouldn't be enough to describe him. After he agreed, he didn't need Luo Fan to urge him, nor did he do anything. From the world above him, something as big as a planet shot out from that world. After leaving that world, it disappeared without a trace. When it reappeared, it was already in the heavenly god's palm. Although this thing was as large as a planet, it was still extremely small compared to the heavenly god that was as large as a dozen or so star systems. It seemed so insignificant as it lay in the palm of the heavenly god. It didn't even look much bigger than a speck of dust. It felt like if the heavenly god blew on it, it would fly away and disappear. There's too much information, so this memory is a bit too big. The heavenly god looked at the speck of dust in his palm, then looked at Luo Fan and said with some embarrassment. When Luo Fan saw it, he just smiled and waved his hand. The planet-sized technological creation gradually shrank. In the blink of an eye, it shrank to the size of a fist. Then, it directly broke through the void and appeared in his palm. What an exquisite creation! Holding the so-called memory, Luo Fan couldn't help but exclaim. This memory did not use anything that Luo Fan was familiar with to store information. It wasn't electromagnetism, it wasn't photons, and it wasn't some random crystal. Instead, it used a very strange substance. This substance seemed to be a product of memory. It looked extremely soft and could change its shape like plasticine. However, such a substance, as long as it was the size of a fist, could store all the information that 10 ordinary people could remember in their lifetime. The amount of information stored had reached a level that even Luo Fan couldn't imagine. The word memory was not just a description of its function, but also a description of its material nature. The size of a fist was equivalent to the brain of 10 people. At this time, it was easy to imagine how much information such a star-sized memory could store. His will cut into the memory, and in an instant, there was an endless amount of information constantly pouring into his mind through his will, allowing him to instantly know what the information stored in the memory was. After knowing this, Luo Fan nodded in satisfaction. He withdrew his will and placed the memory into his sleeve universe. You want to know why your understanding of the world is one-sided? Since he had already received the payment, the next step was naturally to work. Yes, I hope that a mortal can dispel my doubts. The god said solemnly. It's very simple. The way you study the world determines that your understanding of the world is definitely one-sided. Luo Fan said lightly. I don't know if there's a saying here, absolute truth. You can never obtain it, only approach it. There is no such saying, but there's a similar saying. The god said solemnly. That's the basis of what you've said. For you, the world is the absolute truth. Since you can never obtain the absolute truth, you naturally can't completely understand the world. Luo Fan said. Is this saying wrong? The god's face showed shock. If this saying was also wrong, then Luo Fan had once again overturned the foundation of the existence of another technological civilization. This made him feel shocked. For a technological civilization, of course it is correct. But for a cultivator, it is wrong. This is actually the fundamental difference between a technological civilization and a cultivation civilization. You study things. You start from the phenomenon and analyze the phenomenon to find the principle behind it and approach the truth of the world. But our cultivation civilization is different. We directly come into contact with the supreme Great Tao, and through the Great Tao, we know the principle of all phenomena. Oh, perhaps you don't know what the Great Tao is, but if you insist on using words that you can understand, the Great Tao is equivalent to your absolute truth. Luo Fan smiled faintly. Starting from the absolute truth to deduce the phenomenon, starting from the phenomenon to approach the absolute truth. The god's expression was startled as he murmured. Although he was murmuring to himself, these words were still very grand for his huge body. It was so vast that it almost shook the void and created gales in the universe. I see. It seems that you cultivators directly obtain the complete structure of the world from the absolute truth and then create it like an inverted mold. But we use our understanding of the universe to build it like building blocks. This is indeed a fundamental difference. The god sighed, his face full of helplessness. Inverted mold? Building blocks? That's a very good description. Luo Fan listened to the god's description. He sighed in admiration. This description was very vivid. For example, if you use the inverted mold method to build a metal sculpture of a hero, then as long as the original mold was carved well, the final metal sculpture would certainly look very similar to the hero, or even exactly the same. But if you use the building block method, then no matter how skilled the building block was, there would inevitably be some gaps in the end. And because of the shape of the building block itself, the constructed hero sculpture would most likely look like a mosaic and would certainly be very different from the real image. A complete universe can produce energy out of thin air. If a truly complete world is created, then of course it can have the same characteristics. And the world constructed by our cultivation civilization, just like how our research can never truly obtain the absolute truth, it can never truly become a complete world. Therefore, the world we create, no matter how advanced the technology used, no matter how meticulous, can never break through the limits of the conservation of energy. The truth of the matter is actually like this. The god sighed, his eyes filled with despair. Although this matter only seemed to be talking about the difference in the creation of the world between the cultivation civilization and the technological civilization, but in essence, at least in the god's view, this was talking about the strength of the technological civilization and the cultivation civilization. The cultivation civilization could directly come into contact with the absolute truth, but the technological civilization could only approach the absolute truth no matter what. From a god's point of view, the difference between the technological civilization and the cultivation civilization was obvious. How could the god, who was completely a product of technology and the will of all living beings in the nation of God, not feel despair? This was like searching for a path for hundreds of millions of years, only to realize that this path was actually a wrong one when he was about to reach the end. It was a dead end in front of him. It was easy to imagine how painful this feeling was. The god himself was the entire nation of God, and also the entire galaxy. His despair was directly transmitted to every solar system, every planet, and every living being in the galaxy. In an instant, it caused a shocking amount of destruction, causing more than 1% of the living beings in the galaxy to die in an instant. although this 1% was a small percentage. When compared to the incalculable population of the entire galaxy, it was equivalent to trillions of living beings. And these dead living beings' remnant will of despair naturally condensed on the god, forming a faint black mist that gradually enveloped the god. At this moment, the after-effects of the many losses he had suppressed erupted at the same time. The god's entire body began to crumble, and his gigantic humanoid form began to transform into a gigantic spiral vortex, which was also the original appearance of the entire galaxy. Even a god formed from the will of a planet can go to a dead end? Luo Fan couldn't help but be startled when he saw the transformation of the god. Then he couldn't help but shake his head with a bitter smile. This mental fortitude, isn't it a bit lacking? To actually be unable to withstand a mere verbal attack. If I had known that mental fortitude was this weak, I wouldn't have needed to resort to violence. Couldn't I have just used words?